The story begins in a pavilion with two people talking. GWI says he waited for decades but will only take one, as he pours the liquid into the cup and says they were both young when they first met. Everything goes silent. The old man thinks it's been 40 years since he first saw that man and remembers telling him to use the regression technique to send him back to the past. The Great Regression Technique is one of the greatest achievements of the GWI family, a technique researched for centuries and passed down which was nearly impossible to use. It could have been completed, but he had no choice but to give up. The 5 materials required to complete the technique were impossible to obtain altogether. The young man said he would do it if he brought the materials needed for the Great Regression Technique. The Thunderbell, a sacred artifact of the Heavenly Wind cult. The Divine Brazier and Incense, a sacred artifact of the Heavenly Wind cult. The Divine Incense Bracelet, a sacred artifact of the Divine Dragon family. The main essence of the 10,000-year carp, the secret demonic soul of the demonic cult. And he managed to obtain the 5 million Nyang, but beyond that he got nothing else, while the man in front of him managed to obtain everything over many decades. To obtain the last material, the secret demonic soul of the demonic cult, in real time, Ryongjia says she thought it had been eliminated somewhere unknown and asks how he managed to get all those materials. The MC replies that this technique must be something phenomenal to require all those materials and even considered just eliminating him. GWI observes him and thinks he was very young when they met, and now he's turned into an old man with gray hair and his aura has changed a lot, and he figured the change was inevitable since he went after the materials needed for the Great Regression Technique and asks why he wants to return to the past. The old man slams the cup on the table and says it's for revenge. Ryongjia looks at him and asks if it was impossible to get revenge even with today's abilities, that he needs to go back to the past and who he hates so much. He answers yes. The MC watches and says, it's Hua Mugi. All the leaders of the 3 strongest groups, the Pillars of Murim, were eliminated by his hands. The leader of the Murim Alliance, the Unorthodox Alliance, and the Celestial Demon were also eliminated. And the strongest man in history, Hua, is the strongest person of this era. Rai says she doesn't think he'll be able to eliminate him, even if he goes back to the past. The old man replies that he needs to eliminate him no matter what, because the Celestial Demon, whom he eliminated, was his father. GWI looks surprised and the MC says he's not seeking revenge because he eliminated his father, nor because he eliminated his treacherous brother, and it's not uncommon for people who dedicated their lives to demons to end up eliminated. Rai asks why then. The old man looks at her and says that day, Huai eliminated his servants, cooks, even children who didn't know a thing about martial arts, and also killed the dogs and cats. GWI says he doesn't believe that. The MC says he doesn't care whether he believes it or not, and that in this era he won't be able to eliminate him, so he needs to go back to the past to do it, and will ask him why someone as strong as him felt the need to eliminate even children. Rai looks at him and says that if the Great Regression Technique works and he can go back to the past, she needs a favor, for him to find her. The old man asks why. GWI replies that he wants him to stop him from getting married. They stare at each other. The MC watches him and starts laughing. Rai says she's not joking and that he should tell him to live alone until the end of his life. And now they go to the place where the Great Regression Technique will be used, and she asks if he's ready. He replies that he's holding on, lost his arm and an eye, but it was a small price to pay to obtain the secret demonic soul. The necessary equipment is placed on the altar. GWI holds a box and opens it, releasing a great mana. He makes a hand movement as the manas swirl around, causing a strong light and opening a portal. Rai looks surprised and says he did it and that he knew it would work. He looks back and the old man is breathing heavily. He stares at him and then looks at the portal and says he's sorry, repeating it twice, saying he promises to look for him and warn him of the imminent disaster. And going back to the past is his greatest wish along with his family, until he notices something strange and realizes he can't move, and his demonic acupoints have been sealed. The MC asks how he dares. GWI starts to tremble. The old man asks how he dared do that. The MC strangles him. Rai says he lost his mind for a moment, and he's sorry, and he knows how painful it was to obtain all those materials and he shouldn't have done it. The old man watches him and releases him, saying he's also a selfish person and didn't care about anyone but himself, and that's how he got all the materials. And if it were anyone else, he would have eliminated them on the spot. But since it's him, he understands and thanks him for having waited his whole life. GWI looks at him with eyes full of tears and keeps watching him, saying he's sorry, until something strange starts happening. The MC doesn't understand. He looks to the side, butterflies flying around, and thinks everything has stopped and doesn't understand what's going on. A voice says he passed all the tests. An old man approaches. The MC asks who he is. The old man replies that he's the one who can take him back to the past, and there's no way a human can understand the logic of the heavens. and asks if he really thought that a mere mortal and some materials could make time travel possible. What was truly necessary to complete the technique wasn't those materials, but rather the effort he put in to obtain them. And he passed the test, lived his whole life with one goal in mind, and sacrificed everything for that goal. And forgiving GWI was the final test. And that was the hardest test of all, but he still completed it easily. The MC says he passed the test and that he can fulfill his wish and send him to the past. The old man asks what he'll do there. The MC replies that he'll eliminate those who deserve it and save those who shouldn't have been lost. The old man asks if that's all he wants to do when he goes back to the past. He replies that he also wants to enjoy his life, one of the reasons for his desperation to go back in time. The old man asks what he regrets. He replies everything, and that since he was born, his actions weren't his own will, and he acted based on so many external events. And when he realized it, his life was already over. The old man stares at him and says he's curious about the kind of life he will live. The flying butterflies become colorful again, and GWI says he's sorry. He looks at him and tells him not to forget the promise to stop him from marrying. The MC looks at him and tells him to be well. Rai calls him and says to remember what he asked. In another place full of people, the MC and his young body watches while many people stand before him. He says he's back in the past, until he notices something, turns and looks intently at someone sitting and staring at him, and realizes it's his father. The two stare at each other, and a voice asks how long he's going to make them wait, and someone strikes a sword on the ground saying to fight already. The second young master stares at him and thinks he understands that today is the day of the new demonic battle. The MC thinks that his father, the celestial demon, declared that he would not limit the selection of the next cult leader to just his own bloodline, and that caused a stir within the cult because it meant that anyone could become the celestial demon as long as they were the strongest. With that, his father showed he was serious about his announcement and launched a fighting competition among the next generation leaders of the cult, and the winner of the new demonic battle would have the chance to challenge one of the two sons of the celestial demon. Whoever won that fight would have a wish granted by the celestial demon. The second young master stares at his opponent and thinks he now remembers that back then he was very offended that he chose him because his decision meant he thought he was an easier target than his older brother. But looking back, he might have chosen him for another reason. And he had the cook from his kitchen mix energy-scattering poison into his rice so he couldn't use his energy temporarily. And he lost the fight because of that dirty trick. And he told his father what happened, but he said nothing. And he looked at him with eyes that seemed to blame him for falling into such a petty trick. And did some things afterward, said that they really pushed him to his limits to make up for today's defeat. And because of the mistakes and failures he experienced, he was losing his position in the succession war. And it all started with today's defeat. The opponent asks if he's distracted even with him in front of him. The MC stares at him and asks what he said his name was. Gu asks if he's ignoring him. The second young master realizes he's one of the 7 disciples of one of the 8 supreme demons, Gu, the demon of the blood sky sword. Pyun says that since he dares to mess with him, he must be confident in his skills. The MC looks in his father's direction and thinks he didn't know this in the past, but he thinks he knows now. Those eyes. His father already knew he had been poisoned with the energy-scattering poison, and was watching to see how he would overcome that troublesome situation. Since he still has what he learned in his past life, he should be able to defeat Gu in a single move without using any internal energy, but he can't show his true skills there. He raises his hand and confidently says this in front of all the cult's heroes gathered there. He will fight his challenger without using any internal energy. Everyone around and his opponent look surprised and start calling him the unbeatable swordsman. Gu, irritated, says that if that's how he wants to play, he also won't use his internal energy. People fall silent and comment among themselves that this fight is going to be boring. Pyun grumbles, slams his sword on the ground, and says that even if he doesn't use his internal energy, he better remember that his sword has no eyes and cuts anything it hits. The MC feels strange in this young body and wonders if he'll be able to move it the way he wants. Gu tells him to draw his sword. The second young master says he thinks he doesn't need to use a sword. People start laughing. Pyun says he won't eliminate him since he's the son of the cult leader, but he's going to take one of his arms. He approaches quickly. The swordsman thinks his body is capable of reacting instantly and is faster than he thought. Then the MC dodges the attack by flipping and jumping on the ground, placing his hand over his heart and thinking it's beating so hard at this age. Gu, irritated, asks how he dares to laugh. The second young master watches him and runs toward him, hitting him. Pyun screams, and the swordsman hits him again in the face, making blood splash around, preparing his punch again and hitting repeatedly without stopping, causing serious injuries to his opponent. Gu falls to the ground. The MC grabs his arm and asks if it was that hand he used to give the poison. Pyun looks surprised. The second young master breaks his arm and his opponent screams in pain. People look shocked. The The swordsman looks at his opponent on the ground and thinks that now that he's back in the past, he won't let others influence how he lives his life anymore. Someone raises a hand and a voice says that, as stated, a wish will be granted. It's the leader saying he needs to say what he desires. The MC remains silent and thinks people would ask for a craftsman's sword or a secret martial arts manual. That's probably what everyone is expecting. But he follows his instincts and says he wants to go on a hunt with his father. The leader and others look surprised, and his father asks if he wants to hunt with him. The swordsman replies yes and says he heard he liked to hunt when he was young and would like to learn to hunt from him. The leader looks at him, stands up, and says they will leave the next day at dawn. He gets up and walks. The MC watches him and someone calls him an idiot. It's his opponent saying he can't believe he made such a ridiculous wish. The second young master asks what his name was again and thinks that now that he's back, the reckless life they all lived doesn't interest him anymore. As night falls, the swordsman looks at himself in the mirror and thinks he's different from his former self. He keeps staring at himself in the mirror and wonders what Hua might be doing now and thinks that if he can find and eliminate him before he becomes strong, he can solve that problem easily. The problem is that he's hard to find. He appeared in Jiangchu as if he had fallen from the sky. After destroying the Murim Alliance, the Unorthodox Alliance, and the demonic cult, he hid from the world, so there isn't much information about him. But trying to find him by telling the whole world his name would be a dangerous act of provocation. And his priority is still to become stronger than Hua. While he's distracted, someone calls him saying he fought excellently today. The MC turns and asks if it's Li. The bodyguard answers that it is. The second young master thinks he didn't know at that time that her size was due to the martial art she learned, that it was all because of him. Body petrification technique. The user gains the ability to make their body as tough as stone temporarily. It's a secret technique known only by a few and was taught to her. The biggest drawback of this martial art is that it makes the user's body really big. The bodyguard threw herself in front of him to block the sword aura that Hua sent his way, letting him live thanks to her sacrifice. Li asks why he's looking at her like that. The swordsman thinks he didn't notice that her voice was so pleasant and that she was ready to sacrifice her life for him. But he only saw her as a mere guard at that time and took her for granted, just like people take the presence of oxygen in the air for granted. He approaches her and realizes she's bigger than he remembered. Li is confused, and the MC continues thinking that everyone said she would become the greatest beauty in the world if she kept growing like that, but suddenly became fat one day, and he didn't know at that time that she cried so much for becoming fat and never noticed how her eyes were swollen because of it. And he wonders how she felt, and she gave up her appearance when she could have become the greatest beauty in the world, and wonders how he treated her after she did that. And he thinks maybe he treated her more coldly over time after she became fat. The second young master observes and thinks that she promises to eliminate the side effects of the body petrification technique for her. The bodyguard asks if he is okay. The swordsman looks at her and replies that he is fine. Li says he's acting a bit strange today. The MC thinks that with her as a bodyguard protecting him every day, she noticed how he changed. And he says he will show something even stranger. The guard asks where they are going. He replies that it's to flip the dinner table. In the pavilion, the second young master is facing some men and asks why he did it. The man asks what he means. The swordsman looks at him and says he means why he poisoned the food with energy-dissipating poison. The cook replies that he didn't do it. The MC asks if he lost the 3,000 he received in the game and thinks this guy got into a huge debt because he got addicted to gambling and spent all his parents' money and even the money he borrowed from friends, and that's why he dared to do something as crazy as poisoning his food. The cook kneels and says he made a mistake and asked to be forgiven because he was blinded by money and made a huge mistake. The second young master asks if Gu personally approached him to give him the money. The cook replies yes. The swordsman beheads him without thinking twice. The other cooks look terrified. The MC says it's a shame, a cook of all people, poisoning others' food. The old cook kneels and apologizes, taking responsibility, saying everything that happens in the kitchen is his responsibility. The second young master observes him and asks if every injustice that happens in the cult is his father's fault. The old cook replies that's not the case. The swordsman asks why he's trying to take responsibility for this and tells him to stop talking nonsense and make shredded chicken noodles for dinner, and that it's been a while since he ate it and he wanted it for dinner. The old cook stays silent, and Li asks if he didn't eat that a few days ago. The MC turns, looks at her, and thinks that for him, that was decades ago. The next day, at dawn in the pavilion of the celestial demon, the leader asks what's with all those belongings he brought. The second young master replies that they are the things he will need in the coming days. His father replies that he only planned a one-day hunt. He replies that he might enjoy the hunt and stay a few more days. The leader looks at him and says that's an ambitious dream he has. In the mountains, the two walk and his father says he is better than he thought. The swordsman wonders if he noticed he was hiding the skills he accumulated in his past life while fighting Gu and wonders if it would be better to tell him. And he starts to say he was hiding his skills, his father replies that he noticed. The MC says he's not a cat that purrs, but a beast that hides its claws. The leader stops and asks why a beast would hide its claws. The young master replies he didn't think of it that way, and his father says that's why he is a cat. And he asks how much of the ascending sword art he has mastered. The swordsman thinks the ascending sword art is passed only to the bloodline of the celestial demon and is considered an extremely advanced martial art, similar to the arts learned by supreme demons, and says he has fully mastered it. Suddenly he is almost hit but manages to dodge and thinks that if he hadn't dodged, his entire cheek would have vanished. The leader says he really did master it. The MC asks if he didn't think he had mastered it and still attacked him, and what he would have done if he hadn't dodged. His father replies that he would have paid the price for lying. The young master replies that a face that looks like his wouldn't look good with a scar. The leader falls silent, and the swordsman wonders if he went too far. His father says that having completely mastered it at that age is worthy of praise. The MC looks surprised to hear that and thanks him. They stop, and he asks who taught him to hunt. The leader replies that it was his older brother. The young master asks if he had an uncle. His father replies that he eliminated him. The swordsman watches him and says he did well, otherwise he wouldn't have been born. The leader stares at him. They fall silent, and the MC thinks that even his father would have been hurt having to fight his own family, and he saw that many times in his past life. The stronger a person looks on the outside, the deeper their wounds can be. The leader says that at the time he couldn't find any other solution. The young master thinks that he couldn't find a way to win the succession war without eliminating his own brother, and says he hopes he doesn't think he can do what he couldn't. And he already knows there's no need to even consider it because his brother is so cruel and sadistic. His father watches him, stops, and says he's speaking ill of him when he's not around. Still in the mountains, they are climbing the mountain. The swordsman climbs and thinks that he didn't marry in his past life, so he never knew what it was like to have children. So he's curious and wonders what kind of existence it is to his father. They manage to climb the mountain, and he asks if there's something there. His father replies that it's dinner. The MC says they have to eliminate them in that case. The leader asks how he's going to eliminate something he can't even see and tells him to close his eyes and feel his surroundings. The young master replies that he understands and closes his eyes and thinks that when martial artists try to read their opponents, they feel the vibrations in the air, and people refer to that as the energy flow of a being. And near himself, he can only feel the energy flow of his father. The leader says to send out a little energy in a straight line without breaking it and make it thinner and imagine the body as a ball of yarn and discharge his energy slowly as if pulling a thread. The swordsman continues with his eyes closed, and his father asks if he reached it. He replies that he can feel it. The leader asks what he thinks it is. The MC replies that he believes it's a tree. His father tells him to search the surroundings slowly. The young master, still with his eyes closed, moves his energy until he comes across something and quickly opens his eyes, asking if it's a boar. And he says it had stiff fur and a long body, so he thinks it might be a wild boar. His father replies that he's right and looks at him, saying that at first he also couldn't discern it correctly from that distance. The swordsman says that he was blessed with a body that learns martial arts very quickly, so that's not a problem for him. The leader falls silent. Flames move. They are roasting the boar, and his father asks when he learned to prepare wild animals for cooking. The MC replies that he learned it in a book. The leader says he seems quite skilled at it. The young master says he's glad he gave that impression, and thinks that's because he hunted countless boars before regressing, and he says he prepared the seat for him so he could gain his approval, and it was worth carrying all that baggage. His father asks if he came hunting with him to impress him and become the successor. The swordsman replies that he knows that wouldn't work with him, and he can become the successor on his own. The leader says he has a lot of confidence and asks why he came to hunt. The MC replies that he wanted to learn as much as possible from him so he could become stronger. His father asks what comes after becoming stronger. The young master replies that he is not getting stronger to become a celestial demon, as he is still young and will be satisfied if he can learn the martial arts of the celestial demon by becoming a successor. He observes in silence and thinks that he needs to quickly learn to master the demonic art of the 9 calamities and must go beyond that. Even his father, who had mastered the demonic art of the 9 calamities, was defeated by Hua, and he at least needs to master it. The leader asks about the second reason. The swordsman looks at him, smiles, and says he wanted to spend some time alone, and this is the first time they've done that. His father says that this useless emotion will end up getting him killed. The MC asks why it's useless, since he can spend time with the strongest man in this world, and if he sings songs, then they will become the best songs in the world, and if he drinks something, it will become the best drink too. The leader watches him, lowers his head, and remains silent. The young master looks at him and thinks that whenever he tried to remember his father, no memories would come to his mind, and memories of the fear he felt from him don't count. In this life, he doesn't want to have only those memories, and that's for himself. At dawn, his father says they are not going anywhere because he came to hunt a celestial demon, and they must eliminate at least one tiger before leaving. The swordsman looks surprised. The leader tells him to follow. The MC agrees. After walking a lot, they stop, and his father tells him to close his eyes, and the target is 90 meters away, even farther than the last hunt, and he wants him to feel the wind this time and unify his energy with the wind. The young master thinks that in all the years he spent learning martial arts, he never considered merging his energy with the wind before, and there was no one to teach him that, and none of the martial arts he saw taught that. The leader tells him to release the energy, and if he is slow and careful, it will be just a mere magic trick, and if he wants to use it in a real situation, he needs to send the energy to the target as fast as he can. The energy moves, and the swordsman thinks he can feel the wind and his energy, and wonders how to combine the two. The energy keeps moving, getting more intense, until he realizes something, that merging with the wind is not just using it as a guide, and what he needs to do is unify both. The energy keeps moving, going deeper, until it hits something, and it's the tiger. The MC looks shocked and says it really is a tiger and asks what happened. The leader tells him to stay firm in the energy release training. The more energy lines he can maintain, the greater his chances of survival. The young master says this is his greatest trump card. They drink something. His father watches him and says, "That's good." The swordsman says it's a bit strong for him and thinks it's a lie. The leader says no demonic human would complain about a drink being too strong. The MC asks who cares whether he can drink or not and says having a wicked heart is more important than drinking strong drinks. His father asks if he could eliminate him in order to keep living. The MC replies no, and asks what kind of son could eliminate his father, and thinks that is also a lie because if there were enough reasons, he would eliminate him even if he were his father. And it's the first time having a real conversation, but he is still more attached to his own life than to his father's, and asks how he could eliminate him. The leader says that if he is hesitant about that, he shouldn't say things like having a wicked heart. The young master says that in that case, he will have to increase his tolerance to strong drinks. He keeps drinking, and his father stares at him. In the pavilion, the swordsman is sitting on the ground, sighing and staring blankly, thinking that after focusing on a few days of training since his regression, he is now able to infuse his energy into the wind freely and can also maintain 3 to 4 energy threads. And he didn't expect his father to teach him how to release his energy to scan the surroundings. And that is good, as he will be able to detect the enemy trying to attack him first. And if he keeps training and becomes capable of releasing more than 10 energy threads at the same time, he might be able to neutralize any stealth technique used by his enemies. Still deep in thought, he gets up and continues thinking that even his father, who is very skilled, lost to Hua, who infiltrated the celestial demon's pavilion, which was a place strictly guarded by 3 barrier formations, 6 trap formations, and a group of carefully selected elites. And there are also the 8 supreme demons in 8 different directions and their subordinates protecting the demon. In the north, there are the demonic swordsmen of the northern heavens, sword family led by the one-strike sword supreme. In the south, there are the demonic swordsmen of the southern heavens, blade family led by the blood heavens swordsmen. In the east, there are the iron fists of the eastern fist faction, led by the invincible pine demon. In the west, there are the demonic sorcerers of the Western Illusion Formation, led by the soul-stealing demon. In the northeast are the faceless swordsmen who wish to become the evil smile demon. In the southeast, there are the drunk swordsmen, who are always drunk with the drunken demon. In the southwest are the poisonous fangs, who research all kinds of poisons together with the poison king. And in the northwest are the monks crazy for the beliefs of the demon Buddha of world deception. And back then, he thought the enemy had invaded from outside and realized the outer defense was never breached. And he is sure that someone among the 8 supreme demons let Hua into the demon pavilion where he was. And with that in mind, there may be more than one traitor who was never found. But it doesn't matter because he treats all 8 supreme demons as traitors. And after his father was eliminated, none of the 8 supreme demons sought revenge, and instead decided to shut down the demonic cult. And that is still a distant event in the future. And he knows everything about the 8 supreme demons, and knows how their final moments were. The MC walks quietly, thinking that this time he will use the 8 supreme demons to the last drop. He keeps walking until he hears someone calling his bodyguard Chubby and asking about him being in the training field since many days have passed and they can't wait anymore. Lee asks what he just said until he hears someone calling her. The young master approaches and says he told her to do her own things while he was training. And a man says he finally came out and asks why he suddenly started training out of nowhere and even trained for days. The swordsman realizes it's a disciple of the blood heaven, Yang Po, and thinks the reason he dares to act like this is entirely because of his father. And after announcing that anyone in the cult could become the successor, being the son of the celestial demon no longer seems so special, and that the ambitious desires of many within the cult are to defeat the sons of the celestial demon and gain notoriety. And he asks what he means. Yang asks if he already knows that Pyong can no longer practice martial arts because of him. The MC asks if he wants him to go take care of him or something like that, and says he doesn't think their relationship is one where they can have serious conversations. Yang says he needs to take responsibility for crippling him, and to go officially apologize. The young master thinks he knows why he came there, because the best swordsman of the Blood Heaven wasn't selected, so the disciples are trying to impress him by doing whatever it takes. And the guy in front of him wants an official apology so he can brag about not being left in more trouble. And he says he doesn't think his master would choose him as the best disciple just because of that. Yang says that's nonsense, as he's there for Pyong's sake. The MC says he wants him to apologize. Yang asks why. The young master replies it's for speaking rudely to his subordinate and he must apologize to her. Yang is confused. Lee says it's okay. The swordsman replies that it's not okay. The bodyguard looks surprised. The swordsman says he dared to speak rudely to his subordinate, so he wants him to kneel and apologize. Yang asks if he just told him to kneel to the chubby girl beside him. The MC says he's talking nonsense again. Yang says he'd rather be eliminated than kneel to her. The swordsman asks if he'd rather be eliminated and says he'll grant his wish. He draws his sword. Yang and Lee watch surprised. Yang says he's really gone mad. The MC points his sword and says to kneel and apologize or fight, and his master won't be pleased if he chooses to back down. The two keep arguing and the MC says he won't allow him to insult his subordinate. Lee looks surprised. Yang asks if he's trying to eliminate him because of her. He replies that she means a lot to him. Yang draws his sword. His men look scared. Then, the young master also draws his sword. The two stare at each other. Yang says that since he's the son of the heavenly demon, he'll only take one arm instead of his life. Everyone watches closely. Yang takes position with his sword and charges at him, trying to hit him. The swordsman easily dodges and thrusts his sword into his mouth. Everyone there looks shocked, and the MC says his mouth was the cause of his elimination, as he used it to insult his subordinate, and that same mouth refused to apologize. He pulls his sword back and Yang falls to the ground while his blood splatters everywhere. His men run toward him and ask if he thinks he can handle the consequences of his actions. The young master says his mouth reminds him of the one who was just eliminated, and that they may deliver his words exactly as spoken. And if they dare change a single letter, he'll find them by the end of the day. The men take the eliminated one's body and leave without saying anything. And a voice asks why he did that. And it's the subordinate asking. The swordsman thinks she still cares even after being emotionally hurt and says it wasn't just because of her, he simply eliminated someone who deserved it. She says the Blood Heaven won't let this slide. The MC observes and thinks her fear is understandable. The 8 martial artists of the demonic cult have great influence, and they possess superior martial arts skills and subordinates that not even his father can ignore. Blood Heaven is one of the 8 supreme demons. He crippled one of the disciples and eliminated another, and says he won't do anything, as there's nothing to gain by getting involved. He'd only be criticized for not teaching his disciples properly. The guard says maybe his pride will be hurt. The young master says he has no pride in those. The swordsman moves his hand to her shoulder and says she doesn't need to worry too much. Lee stays silent and just watches. The MC thinks he'll gain something for having eliminated Yang, as he destroyed Gu in combat and now Yang, and in this way he'll get everyone's attention within the cult. The subordinate thanks him for what he did today and says that she is very happy he stayed by her side. The young master smiles and tells her to never forget this day. He walks and thinks that she might continue smiling this way because he wants her to live with that smile until the last day. At dusk, in front of the pavilion, the swordsman is sitting on a stone, thinking that he was engulfed by feelings of defeat and fled as soon as the demonic cult was dissolved, and even thought he wouldn't have been able to continue living if he didn't have a goal. He wonders how things would have ended if he hadn't discovered the great regression technique, until he widens his eyes and notices his reflection in something, moves away to look better, and realizes it is a sword and the bloody sky. But he didn't imagine it would come so fast and wonders if he can avoid this sword. And thinking that, no matter how much experience he gained in his past life, his inner energy is still too low and he won't be able to dodge, until the sword slowly begins to move away. The bloody sky sits next to him, observes him, and asks why he did what he did. The MC responds that he did it because he acted like a fool. The old man doesn't understand much, and the young master asks if he came to pick a fight with the youngest son of the celestial demon, who doesn't care about fools. The bloody sky closes his eyes, moves quickly, points the sword at his neck again, and asks if he should cut off his head and show it to the celestial demon to see if he will care. The swordsman responds that he thinks the blade won't be able to cut off his head when imagining his father's terrifying eyes. The old man stays silent, moves his sword away, and strikes it against the ground, causing an impact. The MC doesn't understand much, and the bloody sky says that's how much the celestial demon cares. The smallest proportion is his youngest son, and most is himself. The young master observes, crouches, and shows his finger in a gesture saying that he is his son and thinks he will care about this amount at least. The old man smiles and says they will find out in practice, and asks if he will eliminate him or let him live if he brings the head in his arms. The swordsman says he thinks he is underestimating the paternal love the celestial demon has. The bloody sky says that's why he told him to try. The MC says there's no need for that because he has 2 sons for that. The old man, still smiling, says he is not as foolish as his disciple. The young master stands up and says that if his disciple were a little more like him, he would still be alive. The bloody sky calls him and says he saw his whole life without complications and hopes not to encounter him often. The swordsman responds that he will keep that in mind. He observes him, and his hair moves with the wind as the old man leaves. The MC keeps watching until he mutters, lifts his shirt, and notices wounds on his stomach, remembering the moment the sword was pressed against his body. He stays silent, thinking that the bloody sky gives the impression of acting as he pleases while calculating and planning everything meticulously. The fact that he repeated twice that he would only bring his head to his father shows that he was really going to do that, and he came all the way there to see him, leaving a big impression when he fought with his disciple and must have thought his request to hunt with his father was unique. And he felt the need to test him since he eliminated his disciple, not to mention everything else he did, and he is there to see if he is worthy of becoming a successor. Elsewhere, the young master has his eyes closed, surrounded by mana being emitted intensely, until he opens his eyes, notices something, climbs onto the roof, and sees that his father is there, saying he heard he eliminated the disciple of the heavenly sky swords demon. The swordsman stares at him and says that his disciple deserved the end. The leader says he doesn't care about that, but the bloody heaven came to see him because of it and wants him to receive a punishment. And this was quite unexpected, since he's not someone who normally makes such a big request for the elimination of a single disciple. The MC thinks that bloody heaven is trying to test the relationship he has with his father and wants to see his father punish him, thus also discovering if his father considers him one of the candidates for successor. His father says he intends to punish him. The swordsman says there's no justification to punish him, and he responds that a justification can be made. The MC falls silent, and the leader asks if he had asked before which supreme demon he trusted the most while hunting. The young master answers that yes, he remembers when he asked, but his father didn't give an answer at the time and remained silent. The leader says he doesn't trust any of the supreme demons and says that hierarchy and discipline need to be set in order within the cult, and that he shouldn't come up with nonsense like the eradication of corruption because he wants to hear the true thoughts. They both stay silent, staring at each other. The swordsman says he feels that somewhere along the way they lost the path of the demon. His father looks at him and asks if they lost the path of the demon and what the path of the demon means to him. The MC answers that it would be the belief that only their cult has to defeat the absolute evil. The leader asks about defeating the absolute evil. The young master responds that he doesn't think the orthodox faction is the direct opposite of their cult, but rather an absolute evil, a cowardly and wicked evil that no human in the world can endure. Even demons would despise and distance themselves from them, and the justice they strongly defend should be able to deal with the less evil ones, but he doesn't think they're capable of handling the absolute evil, and the orthodox faction is fundamentally rooted in forgiving while they value people. He asks how they could match up with the evil that abandoned humanity and went mad, and he says they are the only existence in Murim that can rid themselves of the evil that is atrocious and malicious, being even more malicious. When the great evil, which even the orthodox faction can't deal with, kneels before them, he thinks that's when they will have truly completed the path of the demon. And they can't truly complete the path of the demon and won't go far and must punish themselves so they can survive. His father falls silent. The swordsman watches him and thinks he's sure he never thought about this or heard anything like this before, because he never learned or realized this while being in this cult. And that's what he felt when he wandered the Central Plains his whole life. The leader asks if there are any more arrogant thoughts. The MC looks at him and answers no. His father says he thinks he knows why Bloody Heaven wants him to punish him, because he saw something and wants him to test it. The young master says he thinks he saw a possibility of being a successor candidate within himself. The leader says maybe he sees him as someone who can mess up the cult. The swordsman says that old man has good eyes to see the extraordinary. His father stares at him and tells him to follow him. The MC asks where they are going so late until they reach the small cave of the sky and stand in front of the gate. The young master thinks that this place is where a possible candidate can become the celestial demon or the disciple of the demon, or the demon's son will be tested. Entering is easy, but if he can't pass the tests within it, then he will be trapped there forever. The success rate was 50-50. Half of the people with blood ties to the celestial demon who entered there lost their lives. And this place is so dangerous that even his brother didn't mention wanting to go in. But this is a place that must be passed at least once if you want to become the celestial demon. When asked if he's asking to enter this place, his father replies that he also went in when he was his age. The swordsman asks how long it took to get out. The leader replies that it took 2 months. The MC is surprised by the amount of time, as he thinks his father is known as the most talented in martial arts among all the celestial demons so far. The leader says he was the only one who got out in 2 months, as the rest took an average of 3 years. The young master asks if he wants him to enter a place like that without any preparation, and his father asks if he didn't say he would punish him. The swordsman falls silent and thinks that he's sending him to this place where he could be eliminated just because the bloody heaven wants to punish him, and wonders if he really doesn't care if his son is eliminated or if he's hoping he'll get stronger and survive. The MC smiles and says he'll try to get out even earlier than him. The leader says to just try to stay alive. The young master walks through the cave's corridor and wonders how bad this place is for so many people to have been trapped there. He looks around and keeps walking until he stops and is notified to cut the enemies without using aura on the sword, and if he can't finish in time, he'll only have another chance in 10 days, and if he's ready, he can stay in the Crimson Circle. The swordsman observes the grains that are his food while he's there and thinks of starting. He walks to the circle and sees his enemies being summoned around him, and there are many of them, and he thinks he has to cut where the red marks are. The MC starts cutting them, still observing them, and continues cutting them non-stop, thinking they're tougher than he expected. He looks to the side and notices that he can't let them go, so he moves quickly toward them and cuts them quickly along the red lines until he stops and realizes he's missing the last one. The young master runs toward it quickly as it's about to disappear and cuts it, breathing a sigh of relief as he almost had to stay another 10 days there for letting his guard down, and he never would have been able to pass this first challenge with his skills before regressing. He looks around at all the defeated ones and continues walking, moving forward and observing the writings of people who wrote how much they managed to do. Desperate, fearing being eliminated in the place until the swordsman notices the writing at the end, calling them idiots, and realizes it's his father, thinking that even though he's not wrong, he doesn't believe he gave a scolding to his ancestors. Still walking, he comes across the circle in the middle of a room. The MC looks to the side and also notices the variety of weapons, continues observing and thinking that this challenge must require the use of them, and is notified to use the sword on the wall and cut the stone in half within 2 hours. And if he doesn't manage within the time, he'll have another chance in 20 days. The young master goes to the circle, and the stone is quickly summoned in front of him. He observes and thinks that he has 2 hours to do this, and thinks that's plenty of time to cut a single sphere in half. And if he uses aura on the enhanced sword, then he could cut thousands of those in that time, and this rule must exist for some reason. The swordsman grabs the sword and strikes the sphere, but it's the sword that breaks, and he realizes that just cutting it won't work, and thinks he will use aura on the enhanced sword to cut it in half and move on to the next challenge. He watches intently, grabs another sword, and thinks that this would be too easy, wondering how the others managed this challenge, observing the wall to see how they did it. And the MC looks for his father's writing and notices it says that if it's hot, he will lose. And he asks why it says that, since normally it would just be a complaint and end there, just like the first challenge. The young master looks at the rules again and realizes that it can only be completed if he uses aura on the sword or an improved sword with aura. What his father said must have been some kind of warning not to use aura, and the heat is generated when it's used. He hits the sphere again but ends up breaking the sword. Then he tries with several other weapons multiple times, breathing heavily, noticing there isn't even a scratch on it and his time is running out, asking himself if he shouldn't use the aura on the improved sword and just finish this. The swordsman is exhausted until he looks up and remembers that his father split this in half without using the aura on the improved sword. Then he has an idea, closes his eyes and emits energy towards the sphere, and when he opens his eyes, he sees a small line that he couldn't see just using his eyes. The MC grabs his sword, still with his eyes closed, hits the sphere and manages to cut it in half, getting excited that he succeeded, and notices something inside and becomes curious, asking if it's a demonic essence pill, and thinks that if a demonic human who learned demonic martial arts consumes it, he would be able to obtain a huge amount of energy, and if he had cut the ball with the aura of the improved sword, this pill would have exploded due to the heat. This is a reward given to the person who cuts it only with the sword, and he remembers the writing saying not to generate heat, and thanks his father. The young master sits on the ground with his eyes closed, emitting a strong light and mana around him. He opens his eyes, stands up, clenches his fist, and thinks that he can feel a strong power in this body that he didn't feel before, and what he was missing the most was energy, and now he has it. Then he is notified to differentiate the life from the end, and if he fails, he will have another chance 5 days later. The swordsman wonders about differentiating the life from the end. He enters the circle and observes plants, realizing that this is a test that asks them to differentiate herbs from poisonous plants, and remembers searching everywhere for the ingredients that GWI asked for, and knows how to differentiate all types of herbs and poisonous plants and even knows their effects. And this is an easy test for him. And this is the only thing that's not a poisonous plant. The MC continues observing intently and thinks that they want to prevent anyone who is lucky in this test from guessing. So they want them to go through a second test. Those who don't know anything about herbs must consume them to find out. He picks a plant from his hand, a noise is emitted, and he realizes that no more are appearing. The young master looks attentively as he sees the writings and encounters his father's writing not to rely on luck, thinking that when he said this, it meant he remembered everything he ate since the first test, until he is notified of the last test, which is to survive the illusory formation of the life or end trap, and if he is eliminated in the formation of the trap, he will truly be eliminated. The swordsman notes that it's a test where he would be eliminated if he failed. He observes the writings, and the people were scared of this test, and his father's writing was to not rest, and he thinks that although he left some hints for this test, it seemed like advice on how he should live his life from now on, until he hears noises and becomes alert, appearing in another place with wind, animals, and the MC says, this seems real, and he never imagined he could create such real things. He looks to the side and comes across several zombies, thinking that even if they are illusions, he can feel their presence, even their intention to eliminate him, and this is really a good opportunity for himself. The young master draws his sword and faces them. They start running towards him. The swordsman stays alert and the zombies try to hit him, but he dodges and strikes them quickly, thinking that since he's not dealing with humans, the MC moves his sword, attacking them, and thinking that he can fight all of them without hesitation thanks to the demon essence pill. And he managed to use his energy easily. Several types of weapons are aimed at him. He looks to the side and encounters several zombies still, continuing to face them as they approach. The young master takes a deep breath and makes them stop with energy in their bodies, in their heads, all over, and cuts them, spraying blood everywhere and knocking them to the ground. The swordsman holds his sword, looks at them, and wonders if it's over, thinking it would be a shame if that's all. He watches, smiles, and encounters zombies with armor and more powerful energy, and also begins to exchange blows with them and fight. The MC breathes heavily and realizes his enemies are getting stronger, and remembers the writing from his father telling him not to rest, and thinks that now he understands what that means. And this is the first battle that feels like a real fight since he returned. As he fights, it's a pity that to continue fighting with his life at risk, he feels like he's digested the perceptions he had in his past life, and the perceptions from his past life are now becoming one with his current body. He faces daggers approaching to attack. The young master blocks all of them, watches, and continues attacking, thinking that they can come faster and stronger. He uses his sword, attacking and cutting them in half, defeating them. The swordsman breathes heavily, looks around, and wonders if it's over. Notifications congratulate him for safely passing the trials. The MC thinks that he passed the trials and managed to get through them in a day, whereas his father took an entire month. But if people knew about this, it would cause an uproar in the cult. And if it's this fast, people will doubt his achievement more than praise it, and he thinks it's better to stay there and continue his training. And he will fully digest the perceptions he learned there and make them completely his own. In the pavilion, his father says it took 100 days. The young master replies that he did his best. The leader asks if he cut the stone ball the right way. He replies that since he left an obvious clue, after all, he didn't rest in the final illusion trap formation either. His father looks at him and smiles. The swordsman looks closely and notices his father just smiled and wonders if he saw it wrong, and the leader says that he doesn't seem like a fool at least, and sighs. The MC thinks that before he returned, he thought his father liked throwing his children into a life-or-death fight to become the successor, but now he understands that he is someone who would be willing to endure the eliminations of his children if it were for the good of the cult, and not someone who liked to see them fight each other. A voice says that passing through the cave in just 100 days is incredible. The young master thinks that he is the second in command of their cult, the person his father trusts the most there, the chief advisor Sima, and says that it's been a long time. The advisor watches him and says that he's glad to see him there and wanted to discuss something regarding the cult. The swordsman wonders if he wants to discuss a cult matter, and if that means his father desires this. Sima says that they recently received an anonymous letter, and it mentioned that corruption was spreading within the demon army. The MC stays silent, thinking that the demonic army is one of their groups, and the leader would be a blood brother of the Blood Sky Sword Demon. The advisor says that last year they also received a separate investigation, but it ended in failure. The designated special investigation officer was eliminated, and the person from the demonic army who eliminated him also committed suicide shortly after. The young master continues listening. Seema says that he would like him to become a special investigation officer and handle the matter personally. The swordsman thinks that this is dangerous, and anyone caught as an accomplice to the corruption would be executed, and anyone daring to get involved in corruption will do anything to cover up their crime and says he is being asked to do something that could eliminate him. The advisor says that he will need to put his life on the line for this mission. The MC looks aside and thinks that this must be another test from his father. The leader asks if he didn't say that he would control them and hold them by the collars. The young master replies that this is when he becomes the celestial demon. His father asks if he is too scared to do this. The swordsman responds that he cannot refuse this mission if put in these terms and will carry out the mission. They look at each other and he thinks that he doesn't know what his father is planning, but will show him a good performance, and says that since these might be his last moments, he would like them to drink together. The leader doesn't respond, and the MC observes and says that he acts tough on the outside but actually cares about them. The advisor says that it didn't seem that way at all. Elsewhere, a man approaches, introducing himself as Special Investigation Officer Seo from the Nirvana Pavilion. The MC stares at him and asks why he is here, as he requested the most beautiful woman from the pavilion. The officer responds that he thinks she is the most beautiful in his eyes. The young master doesn't respond right away and says they should get to work. Seo asks if they're going now, and he replies that they are. The officer just looks. The swordsman asks what kind of person the commander of the demonic army is. Seo replies that the commander is called Gu. He is Cheon's younger brother, and this year marks his 8th year as commander. Since the demonic army has taken on many dangerous missions, they have risen to the level where everyone recognizes them as an elite army. The MC says that means they are good at their job. He keeps walking, and the officer asks what the problem is. The young master asks if he doesn't intend to investigate the demonic army's corruption. Seo responds that he intends to do so. The swordsman asks why he acts and speaks this way, as he doesn't feel any enthusiasm from him. He responds that even if they expose the corruption, nothing will change. The MC looks and wonders if he is saying that unless the cult's executives are replaced, the cult won't change. The young master closes his eyes and asks if he isn't afraid, and if he's sure, even though the previous special investigation officer was eliminated. Sao responds that he was his direct superior, the person who used to teach him. The swordsman doesn't reply, and the officer stays silent too. At the Demon Dragon's gate, the guards ask where they are from. Sao says that he is an investigator and has matters to discuss with the commander of the army. The MC thinks he is quite brave. The guards say that he cannot enter unless he has permission from the superiors. The officer looks through his book and shows the document. The guards say they will report this to their chief. He replies that it's unnecessary because he will meet his chief personally and asks if they will stop a special investigator who has the document. The guards say it's nonsense and that they have to follow their rules there. SEO asks if it's nonsense. They answer yes, and the only thing he has is the title of special investigator, until someone says they have a question. It's the young master asking if they know who he is. They reply that they do. The swordsman asks if they know and says that even though they know the identity, he attacks them and asks if they dare to behave rudely. The two guards fall to the ground. The MC tells the guy who came with him not to just stand there, but others stop them from passing. The officer says that they are all disrupting an investigation and asks if they want to end up in prison. The people fall silent and others mock him, until a voice asks from which hell they came to cause trouble. Seo introduces himself, and the bald man says he is Dang, the captain of the first squad of the demon army. The officer thinks this guy is the second in command there, known for committing abominable feats even within the demon army. Dang asks why he isn't saying anything. Seo says he's there on official orders and everyone will be arrested for disrupting a special investigation from the Nirvana Pavilion and insulting the investigator. The captain asks if he's going to arrest them. Everyone laughs, and Dang says that he's so scared he wants to see him try. Seo stays silent, and the MC says it's been such a long time and asks about the last time they saw each other. He shakes the man's hand, the captain feels pain, and the young master says he has matters to discuss with the commander, and that he can stop the jokes and let them pass, and if he dares to complain, he will lose his hand. Dang says that there are people who misunderstand things sometimes and think swords don't work on them because of their noble lineage. The swordsman asks if he thinks he can use the sword with that hand. The captain says he'll see then. The MC thanks them for letting them through and says he'll buy him drinks next time. The investigator asks if he knows that guy, and he replies that no, He met him for the first time today. Seo asks why he moved out of the way, and the young master replies that he broke his hand on purpose when he shook it just now, and he will need to eat with the other hand for a while, telling him to stop making a scene and guide the way already. The investigator says the army office is on the 7th floor, until more people appear in front of them, stopping them from entering. The swordsman asks if they haven't gotten tired of this yet and tells them to get out of the way, as they're in an official investigation. He shows the document and tells them to try stopping this official order, and they won't just be stopping them, but stopping the cult leader himself. They don't respond, and the MC asks if he can underestimate them, but doesn't think he should underestimate this order. Or do they really underestimate the cult leader as well? Until a voice says to let him pass. Meanwhile, the commander is sitting in his chair and says, "Welcome," and mentions that his men were rude, and hopes he understands. The young master observes him and feels an incomprehensible level of power coming from his seemingly normal body, and this energy makes the investigator tremble. He observes him and says that they all came to pick a fight and thinks they have too much free time and should read some books instead. Cheon says there's a saying that the ignorant are courageous. The swordsman says that's an old saying, and in recent times, those with knowledge are more courageous. And they're not only good at devising strategies, but also aware of what needs to be done. The commander says it seems he's fallen behind as time passed. The MC wonders if he stayed calm even after his provocation. Cheon asks how he ended up in charge of this investigation this time, and he replies that his father was trying to punish him. The commander doesn't quite understand. The young master says he made a small mistake while they were hunting. Cheon laughs, and the swordsman thinks they must have thought a lot about why he was sent there as an investigator. The commander asks why the Nirvana Pavilion started this investigation, and if another anonymous letter was sent like the last time. The MC replies that they received an anonymous letter. The investigator looks startled. Cheon says he knew, and that being in a position where he leads an army made up of brutish and ignorant individuals, they've received all kinds of slander, and it's really exhausting. The young master says they will finish the investigation as quickly as possible and hopes he can understand if this causes any inconvenience. The commander says it's really sad to hear and thought the relationship was more than that. The swordsman asks if it isn't a well-known fact that the Skyblood demon sword is supporting his brother. Cheon replies that his brother is one person and he himself is another. The MC smiles and says that just hearing that makes him seem trustworthy, and he will be counting on their cooperation for the next few days. The commander says he will also be counting on them and will prepare a place for the two of them to stay after leaving this room, and that they should be careful as he is truly concerned. The young master asks if he is referring to the incident where the previous investigator was eliminated. Cheon says he is sure the leader of the cult wouldn't send his son there to be eliminated and is just worried. He replies that he's grateful for the concern. He walks, and the commander watches them leave. The swordsman smiles and thinks the reason his father sent him there was to see if either of them would be eliminated. Elsewhere, the advisor says it should have been him in charge of the investigation, instead of the boy. The leader says he told them they lost the demonic way. Saima asks if that's why he sent him there. The leader moves his sword and says if he dares to say something that big, he needs to prove his actions. The advisor looks startled. Meanwhile, in another place, a crow is hanging, eliminated, and people are asking what they are trying to do and insulting the Nirvana Pavilion staff, saying they don't care about the investigators. The MC observes and realizes that those who stop them at the entrance are the ones complaining the most. A voice asks if this isn't too much, and approaches. The young master asks who he is. The man replies that he is the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the demonic army, Zhang. The investigator thinks this guy is known for having the greatest martial prowess among the commanders, and he also has quite a strong temperament. The swordsman asks if he has any complaints. Zhang asks what he's trying to do there, putting something unpleasant where people walk. The MC replies that someone within the army threw this on his bed and he thought it was something cultural. Zhang says that instead of doing something unpleasant, he could have just punished whoever did it. They stare at each other. The young master responds that he will start with him then. Zhang asks what he is doing. The swordsman replies that it's the investigation. Zhang doesn't understand what he's talking about all of a sudden. The MC says they should submit all his records, anything related to finances, and all his movements. Zhang says not even he can do something like that. The two stare at each other again. Zhang gets very furious. The young master says he's free to be angry but shouldn't forget that he could be accused of treason if he disrupts the investigation. The commander's men say they should just leave. The swordsman says he will start the investigation with him. Zhang says he will see how this will end. In the pavilion, inside the room, they are staring at each other, and the MC asks how long he will continue testing him. Zhang asks what he means. The young master says that he is the one who sent the letter. The investigator is surprised and wonders why the boy thinks this. The commander asks what he is talking about. They stay silent and he asks how he knows. The swordsman says that he got involved in yesterday's incident, even though he had no reason to, and it was so he wouldn't be suspected by the commander of the demon army. And the members of the 3rd Battalion are the most controlled. When he hung the crow, only his subordinates didn't laugh or curse. And just a moment ago, his subordinates also got worried and stopped him. And he could say that by these actions, someone who controls a group like that would find it hard to ignore any corruption in the organization they are in. They stay silent, and the MC thinks that this isn't the only reason for making such an assumption. And the moment he heard what the investigator said through the frequency transmission, he remembered something from his last life, an incident where the strongest commander among the demon army was eliminated, and it was probably by someone who had sent an anonymous letter to solve the demon army's problems. Jung says he didn't know the letter would influence, so he didn't write the exact details, and he never imagined that he would perform the investigation. The young master asks what he thought when he heard about it. The commander replies that he thought they were screwed. The swordsman asks if it's common for young people to be honest nowadays. Seo says he is younger than them. The MC asks what's happening at the location. Jung stays silent for a moment and then says that the demon commander is using the demon army for his personal use and received money in exchange for elimination requests and has been making his subordinates do the work. The young master is surprised and thinks that he imagined he was just being bribed by some martial group, but this goes far beyond what he thought, and it's already a serious problem for the demon army to have martial masters moving as they please. Seo asks how this is possible. The swordsman replies that it's done by adjusting the number of members within the army, and the 1st Battalion is probably the one doing this. Jung asks how he knows about this. The MC replies that it's how he knew after seeing how the members of the 3rd Battalion reacted, the members of the 1st stopping him. They were also the ones who complained the most after seeing the crow's corpse and asks how he found out it was them. The commander lowers his head and says that the martial artist who was said to have committed suicide after eliminating the last investigator was his friend, and was also the first person to send an anonymous letter. The young master asks how close he was to him. Jung looks at him and replies that he was basically part of the family. The swordsman asks who he thinks eliminated him. The commander replies that he thinks the commander of the army gave the order, and Dang eliminated him. The MC thinks that if this is true, this is a massive case of corruption, where the commander of the army and the entire 1st Battalion are involved, and they went so far as to eliminate an investigator. He wonders if his father and the counselor don't know about this, and they must have realized to some extent, which is why they sent him there and are testing him to see if he can solve this incident, even while going against the commander of the army, and says that he made a good friend. Jung says he was a good friend, and if he had been a good friend too, he would have done something about it. The young master watches him and thanks him for his courage. The commander looks surprised and his eyes fill with tears, unable to hold back the crying. The swordsman thinks that, looking at this day, he's starting to have some hope for the lost demonic path. The divine cult of the demon who wants it will be a place where people like them play important roles. While Jung had been eliminated in his past life, he will not be eliminated this time, because the goal of his regression is to save people who shouldn't be eliminated. Elsewhere, a voice says he seems different from what was heard in the rumors. The MC asks what the rumors say. The investigator replies that they say he is not fit to be a celestial demon. The young master watches him and says that maybe it's even a compliment because someone saying he fits the principles of the demonic path isn't exactly a compliment to himself, and doesn't think the current sect should be governed by a policy of terror and fear, and asks if he doesn't think the sect should also change. The investigator looks surprised. The swordsman thinks the sect needs to change, and if they don't, all that awaits them is the destruction of their family and the fall of the sects. The next day, the subordinate says something happened, and they need to leave immediately. The MC follows him quickly and sees injured people, one of whom is the investigator, and asks if he's all right. Sao replies that he's fine, but his colleague is seriously injured. The young master thinks his ribs are broken and tells them to take him to the infirmary quickly. His friend is taken to the infirmary. The swordsman asks if it was Dong who did this. The captain replies yes. The MC asks why he hurt him. Dang replies that they bumped into each other in the hallway and he left without apologizing, so he just gave him a lesson. The young master says he must have bumped into him, and even if he had apologized, he wouldn't have let him pass. The captain stares at him and laughs, agreeing. The swordsman says, poison. Dang wonders about that. The MC replies that his subordinates are poison. The captain asks about this nonsense. The young master asks if he didn't eliminate his warriors in the same way as last year, and last year he eliminated 3 in a bar fight and thinks that before the incident became a problem, the army commander covered it up. Dang says there are many who don't respect the demonic army commander out there. The swordsman asks if he knows anything and says he has the authority and power to execute him right now. The captain stares at him for a while and asks what good is power if you don't have the ability to execute. The MC thinks that there is the poison. When a fool worries about the opinion of others, this is what happens. and normally he would be extremely nervous, but he's showing off in front of his subordinates, and he's the only one who doesn't realize the situation he's in. He approaches them. They immediately get alert and position themselves. Dong says that if they attack, it's the same as attacking the demonic army. The young master says that at least he doesn't hide behind his subordinates. The captain shows his injured hand and says this is thanks to a coward. The swordsman asks about not using his right hand and says that this way they can settle this between them. Dang stares at him and asks if, in case he gets hurt, he will run and tell his father. The MC replies that even if he's eliminated, he won't hold him responsible. The captain smiles and says they should settle this once and for all. The investigator says quietly that this guy is as skilled with his left hand as he is with his right. The young master realizes that this is why this guy is confident. He positions himself with his sword. The subordinates stay alert. A sword is raised and Dang tries to strike, causing a large impact on the ground and attempting to strike again several times. But the swordsman dodges them all and stares at him, spinning the sword and cutting his opponent's arm. The captain screams until he is hit again and falls to the ground. His men get angry. Seo calls for the swordsman. The MC observes the enemy's subordinates approaching and also attacks them. Those watching look surprised, and the young master says that those who were just eliminated were condemned for treason, until he hears someone telling him to spare his life, and it's Dang on the ground. The swordsman watches him and asks if he knows what happened to the families of the people he eliminated in the bar fight, or the sectmate he eliminated a year ago. The captain doesn't respond, and the MC says that he probably doesn't know because he probably doesn't care, and they lost fathers, sons, or husbands, and asks if these people must be living well. Dang says he was wrong. The young master kicks him and tells him to shut up. Blood splashes, and the enemy's subordinates look surprised, and the investigator also looks shocked, and the swordsman asks who he thinks he is to eliminate one of his sectmates. Elsewhere, someone is playing an instrument called a pipa, and it's a girl, and girls are dancing. Something is placed into a cup, and two people talk about the incident. Cheon says that, although he worked, Dang was a guy full of suspicious things in many aspects. The MC thinks he really is a piece of trash, no matter the circumstances, and was still his loyal subordinate. Instead of avenging him, he makes him a criminal. The army commander says that even though it's for the investigation, if Dang's subordinates make a case about him eliminating the captain of the army, it will be problematic, and asks what he thinks. And if it's not time to end this, and if the captain's and his 3 subordinates' lives aren't enough, the young master thanks for the consideration, and even though he wants things to be peaceful, there's still one problem left. Cheon doesn't understand much about the problem. The swordsman says there is no evidence, but they came for an official investigation, and they need evidence to report to the superiors. The commander asks if he can't forge some evidence. The MC replies that it's difficult, and this time, a report came saying private external contracts are being accepted in the region, and this is not something that can be ignored. Cheon says nothing, and the young master says that to close the case, evidence is needed, and thinks he will now see what evidence will be provided to avoid the investigation. The investigator asks why he is there. The swordsman replies that he came to see his injured friend. CEO says the healer is taking care of him now and thanks for calling the demonic healer. The MC replies that even though he's just a temporary official, he's still a colleague. The investigator stays quiet and someone approaches. The young master realizes it's the demonic healer, and in their cult, the one with the greatest medical skill is called the divine healer. Not everyone can receive his treatment. Only important figures of the sect are allowed, and asks about the condition of the young man. The healer responds that luckily his life is not in danger, but he will need to rest for a while before he can return. The swordsman says to use the best medicine available, until he notices something and asks who those guys are. The subordinate thanks him. The MC walks outside and the investigator asks what the commander said. He replies that he asked them to stop there, and suggested blaming the captain of the first squad. CEO asks if his most beloved subordinate was eliminated, and he says only that. The young master says he wasn't the most beloved, just the most useful, and someone will fill the spot soon and threw out bait to see how they react. The investigator doesn't understand very well. The swordsman says he will tell when they bite her. CEO asks what he should do now. The MC calls him to drink. The investigator stays silent for a moment, smiles, and says that since that's the case, he will pay for his drinks today. The young master smiles. The next day, the army brought some papers. CO says it's an elimination contract and receipts for thousands of Nyangs, and they were found in the house of the captain of the first squad. The swordsman realizes that the bait has been bitten and says to find out who is the smartest in the army, and that person probably forged the documents, and he will meet with the commander again since it will take time to find this person. In another location, he says that evidence was found in the house of the first captain. Cheon thinks this is great and says that now all that's left is to drink to celebrate, and he will reserve the same place they went to before. The MC says he has a problem. The commander of the army asks what the problem is this time. The young master replies that the army brought this, but they should have found this evidence. Cheon asks if the source really matters. The swordsman replies that it does, and that the advisor is not a bad person. And if it comes out to the public that they received this information from the army, it will create doubts in the investigation and the results. The commander of the army remembers the advisor and asks what he suggests. The MC replies that they need to pretend to conduct a quick investigation, a large-scale one-day operation, and he needs his cooperation. Cheon looks bored. The young master asks if he thinks he wants to do this, and says it's just a formal investigation, and basic documents will be enough. The commander of the army says he will have his subordinates cooperate. The swordsman observes and smiles, thinking that they don't even need confidential documents, and what he needs are the records of when they joined the army and the wills they made when they go on dangerous missions. And this is just to verify the handwriting and figure out who created the elimination contract. In another place, Yanggu is sitting on a chair asking why he was brought here. The MC glares at him and wants to know why he created the fake contracts they received. The subordinate says he doesn't know what he's talking about. The young master says he imagined he was just following orders, and at least he can admit that. Yanggu says he never did such a thing and never received orders for that. The swordsman says he understands that he is afraid of being eliminated by the commander. The subordinate lowers his head, and the MC tells him to leave, saying that there is no need to force him to tell the truth if he doesn't want to, and asks if he wants to know, saying he will let him go unharmed, but his master will eliminate him anyway, because the news that he was captured by them has already reached his master, and now he is released without a scratch. And obviously, his master will think he told them everything, and he knows very well what his master will do. Seo says that just as Zhang suspected, it was the commander of the army who ordered the elimination of the Nirvana Pavilion investigator and his friend. And the person who followed this order was Dang, who has already been eliminated. And in addition, countless other evil acts occurred, and the summary is that he eliminated many people. The MC watches him and says they won't arrest him, they will eliminate him. The investigator is startled when he hears this. The young master says that if the commander is arrested, the bloody heaven won't stay idle, and if that happens, the situation will become quite complicated. And forged evidence will appear, claiming that he wasn't the only one behind this. And scapegoats will emerge to take the blame, and all kinds of conspiracy and defamation against him will spread. And if they let them live, many people will end up eliminated. Zhang, who sent the letter, will also be eliminated, and many of the warriors of the 3rd Battalion who tried to protect him will sacrifice him, and even Seo won't be an exception. But if he is eliminated during the arrest process, things will be different, and only evidence of his crimes will remain. The investigator asks if he's ready for this, as bloody heaven will seek revenge. The swordsman says that not everyone lives seeking revenge just because their family was eliminated, especially bloody heaven, who won't risk their life for vengeance. Seo asks where he's going so suddenly. The MC replies that he's going to eliminate the commander of the demonic army. The investigator, surprised, asks if it's now. Elsewhere, the young master says that thanks to him, everything has been resolved well. Cheon says he's happy it's over. But despite feeling relieved, thinking about his farewell with the boy makes him a little sad. The swordsman says that when he becomes the successor, he will undoubtedly repay the kindness shown to him. The commander says that this is something he should be saying, and he won't forget the kindness shown to him by handling the matter peacefully. The MC watches him and thinks that he'll never be able to forget this, and asks why they don't share the drink. Cheon agrees. Then the young master pours the drink into his cup and asks why he did that. The commander doesn't understand what he's talking about. The MC asks why he was so greedy and hired the captain as an eliminator. Cheon watches in silence, places his cup on the table, and says this is a question he should ask the captain. The young master asks what a puppet could know. The commander doesn't understand. The swordsman says he's curious about his mentality and that it must be filled only with greed, never stopping wanting more. Cheon breaks the cup and asks if he's gone mad. The MC says that the crazy one is him for fulfilling all those greed's wishes. The commander breaks the table and says he's tired of his nonsense. Pieces of the table fly. The young master watches him, and Cheon is very angry. The swordsman quickly attacks him, drinks his drink, and thinks that this is the 5th technique of the crescent sword art. He throws the cup onto the floor, stares at him, and says that he's under arrest for misusing the army for his personal reasons and for over 20 eliminations. The commander can't speak properly as a sword goes through his body. The MC says that he's going to be eliminated anyway, so it will be his end and for the good of those who were left behind. The young master grips his sword and pulls it out with blood around it. Cheon widens his eyes, blood is splattered, and he's defeated. People look in shock as they see him eliminated in the chair. The swordsman says that he was eliminated for resisting the arrest process. They don't respond. And the MC orders the investigator to arrest all the army members and lock them up. Seo replies that he understands. The young master calls for Zhang and says that under his command the whole army, except for the first squad, must help the Nirvana Pavilion investigators to arrest the first squad, and he received the authority to take full control of the matter, and his orders are the same as the sect leaders, and everyone must execute his orders immediately. The captain replies that he understands and watches him. Everyone is silent. The swordsman looks and smiles. Elsewhere, the MC walks into the pavilion and comes across his father, the counselor, and Bloody Heaven, and continues walking, looking at Bloody Heaven. They stare at each other, and the young master says that it's been a while since their last meeting. The old man says he hopes he's doing well and wants to know the story behind the incident. The swordsman replies that everything is in the report. The Bloody Sky says he prefers to hear it directly from him. At the moment, the MC stays silent, looks to the side, and realizes that the two are watching and seem to want to see how he deals with this question, and begins to explain that through the investigation, they discovered that his younger brother committed a crime and, during the apprehension, tried to eliminate him. He apologizes for the loss. The Bloody Sky says that if his brother is guilty, he has no objection to him being punished, but he doesn't understand why, despite his brother being a horrible person, he wasn't stupid enough to attack him. The young master thinks that if he had arrested him, he would have sought help from his brother, so he eliminated him to prevent that. He says that even he doesn't understand why he acted this way, and maybe he couldn't bear the idea of being arrested by someone younger. The old man says that he saw his body, and he was eliminated with just a single blow to the chest, and he never imagined that the young master's combat skills were exceptional enough to eliminate someone with one strike. The swordsman says that about that he has to thank his father because even though he got excited when he attacked him, the commander of the demon army couldn't keep up with his full strength. The Bloody Sky smiles and thanks him for his honesty, feeling at ease now. The MC responds that he's just sad about the situation, thinking that he doesn't show the slightest sign of anger. Everyone stays silent. The leader looks at the Bloody Sky and says to rest while they prepare the funeral. The old man thanks him for his concern. He descends the stairs, and the young master thinks that he should have told his father that what happened was exaggerated or that he was disappointed. But this reaction was quite strange. The room remains silent until a voice thanks for the hard work. Since the evidence found is so solid, they were able to close the case without mistakes, and the advisor asks if he was injured. The swordsman replies that he's fine. Sima says that his father wishes, then stops speaking suddenly. The MC doesn't understand anything and looks to the side as someone approaches, and the advisor says that the sect leader wishes to offer a reward to the person who recently contributed the most to the sect. Inside the box is a sword. The young master looks surprised, and Sima says it's the Black Demon sword. The swordsman observes and thinks that it's one of the sect's treasures, along with the White Demon sword. He smiles, saying that if he wanted to reward him, he should have given him the noble White Flower sword, as it suits him better. His father says that the demon sword suits him even more. The MC takes the sword and says that he doesn't know his son well enough to be giving such a gift, and thinks that he didn't even put energy into the sword, and it emitted a very cold aura. The boy smiles, and his father does too. The advisor looks surprised and wonders if the master might have smiled upon seeing his son happy. The young master asks if he doesn't think this reward is more than he should have received. Sima says no, and that the army issue was one of the sect's most complicated and difficult cases, and he never expected him to handle it so skillfully, and asks the master if he expected that. The leader replies no, he just hoped he wouldn't end up eliminated while trying to show off. The swordsman thinks he knows that's not the case, but he sent him because he trusts himself in some way, and his father knows he successfully completed the crescent sword art technique, and knows he wouldn't be easily defeated by the commander of the demon army after taking the demon essence pill, and of course he never expected it to go so far as to eliminate him. He observes and thinks that with this, he is well aware of the reason his father gave this sword, and by doing so, sends a hidden message to that man, appreciating his efforts to contribute to the sect but warns him not to touch his son. The MC clasps his hands and thanks for the sword as well as for the reason it was given. His father watches him and tells him to go. The young master leaves and hears someone saying something, and when he looks, he encounters the Bloody Sky, thinking that he knew this old man wouldn't give up so easily. He approaches the old man. The Bloody Sky notices his sword. The swordsman sits beside him. The old man, very angry, insults him and asks how he dares to attack his brother, saying he will tear him apart and spread him on his brother's grave. The aura emitted is very strong, with flames around it. The Bloody Sky smiles and the aura disappears, asking if that's what he thought he would say. The MC notices the tip of his sword and pushes it, saying he is just an old man who lost his mind with age, and asks how he dares to ruin the sect's discipline for his own selfish interests, saying that if he tries to act against him for eliminating his despicable brother, he will shatter his fragile body like bamboo. The young master smiles and says that if he said that, he would respond this way. The old man widens his eyes and a loud sound is emitted that everyone can hear. The bloody sky asks if he couldn't have just ignored that. The swordsman replies that he intended to deal with him delicately, and, if possible, he would have left him in peace if he could have been forced to step down, but he crossed the line with his actions, and there was never a limit to what he did. The old man observes and says that he understands. The MC looks at him and says that he was aware of his brother's sins and the corruption of the demon army, asking why he tried to stop him. The bloody sky stays quiet for a moment, then responds that he tried, but he wouldn't listen. And in the end, it seems he is not as just and honorable as he thought. And when he heard about his brother's end, he felt relieved. Instead of lamenting his end, the first thing he thought was that the guy wouldn't be in his way anymore. The young master wonders why he is telling him about his brother. They stay quiet for a while, and the MC says that he understands how he feels, and the situation is similar to his. If he heard his brother was eliminated, he would feel relieved too, because he wouldn't have to eliminate him with his own hands. He stays silent afterward, watching the old man beside him, staring at him, wondering what he is thinking. The bloody sky stares at him, then looks forward and says, "It seems the year will be hot." The old man gets up and the young master says that at least he is not sensitive to heat. He watches him leave, thinking that he can't tell what this guy is thinking. Even though he talked about the feeling of relief, they remain enemies. Or maybe these events can be carried away just like the clouds he is seeing. Elsewhere, the swordsman holds the sword he received in his hand, thinking that when one receives a new sword, the most important thing to do is to make the sword connect with the user. And a supreme sword like the Black Demon's sword forms a deeper connection than any other sword. However, even though a black sword will never reject its user, if a good bond is not formed with it, the user will not be able to use its full power. And now, he will be the master of the sword and must try to infuse the sword with his internal energy. He moves his sword with great mana surrounding it. He smiles and says that this is very different from anything he has ever seen. A great mana is emitted around him. The MC observes, jumps, and moves with the sword, thinking that from now on they will survive together with this sword technique, and later he will teach a martial technique. In another part of the pavilion, he trains. Night falls and he continues training while the subordinate is watching him with drinks in her hand. She leaves, while the young master continues training with his sword. He spends a long time training. The swordsman opens the door panting, and when he looks, he sees several people there and realizes they are subordinates of the Blood Heaven, and he doesn't know if they were sent or came on their own. But it's clear their intentions are not friendly, and he feels they are pouring their demonic energies toward him. And if he receives so much energy at once, he could suffer internal injuries. The subordinates look irritated, staring at him. The MC wonders if they want to intimidate him into becoming a coward who can't even leave the house, until he remembers what it means to receive energy from so many warriors at the same time. The young master activates his 1,000 Meridians reinforcement technique and thinks that this is a secret technique where several warriors emit their internal energies to attack the target's entire body and strengthen the meridians. The more warriors involved, the better the effect. And this is a golden opportunity to use the technique and strengthen his meridians. He continues using the technique against them and moves toward them with a great light around him. Strong energies move through the place, and the swordsman thinks that the 1,000 Meridians reinforcement technique has already surpassed the second level and is advancing to the third. More, and much more. The energy becomes increasingly strong. The MC thinks the technique has already passed the fourth level and is approaching the fifth and final level. Still with his eyes closed, he opens them. The energy disappears from the area. The subordinates stare at him intensely, sweating a lot. The young master observes. They say nothing and make way for him to pass. The swordsman looks, walks among them, and thinks he was recognized by them. In another place, he approaches, and someone asks if he wants to sit down. The MC replies to his father that he doesn't want to be stuck in that chair. The leader asks if he's going to give another excuse and calls him to sit. The young master sits, and his father asks how he feels. The swordsman looks around to the side where the statue is and says he feels nothing. The leader says the same thing happened to him. The MC thinks that after spilling blood and even eliminating his brother to sit there, and in the end feeling nothing after sitting on the throne, his father says the subordinates came of their own free will. The young master says so he knew. While he was resisting their pressure, he felt nothing, but when he sat there, he began to tremble. His father asks if he was afraid of them. The swordsman replies, no, and that his fear was that his judgment was wrong because if someone lost control and attacked, he could have been eliminated, and even if he survived, after eliminating all of them, he wouldn't be able to become the heir, and he thinks that's what scared him, knowing there could be another moment where he would have to make a decision that risked everything. And as strange as it seems, it made him want to see his father. and he thinks he doesn't know why, and wonders why he wanted to see his father. The leader says demons aren't people who look back. They only look forward and follow their path. The MC looks at him and wonders if that was his father trying to comfort him. They stay silent for a moment, and the young master says he's been thinking about something for a while. That instead of that ugly demon statue, what does he think about a statue of a beautiful lady? Or one of the four famous central beauties, putting one in each corner. The swordsman gets excited talking about it and says he sees he's already talking nonsense, and it's time to get up. He gets up and goes down the stairs, turns around and asks if he can eliminate the bloodied heaven. The leader remains silent at the moment. He just stares at him and starts laughing, saying that with his skills he might have eliminated the army commander, but the bloodied heaven is beyond his capabilities. The MC lowers his head and asks why he confronted him, and if he shouldn't take responsibility for it. The leader says he will take responsibility and will entrust him with the command of the Nirvana Pavilion. The young master thinks it's the investigation office of his sect, and wonders if he's giving it to him. His father asks if it wasn't him who said he wanted to restore order. The swordsman wonders what that could mean and if he wants to use him to deal with the problems he left behind, not caring whether he is eliminated or not. The two stare at each other, and the MC thinks that instead of trying to read his father's mind, he should judge based on what he sees and hears. And his father is someone who leaves words of encouragement on the walls for his children, but is also someone who will throw his children into dangerous tasks if they prove to be useful. The young master clenches his fist and says that if he is going to be sent to eliminate a cow, at least he needs a blade. The leader asks if there's something he wants. The swordsman asks to be allowed into the Celestial Demon Library, which is a place where all the rare martial arts manuals that are collected go, and only a few authorized people, including the Celestial Demon, can enter there. His father says that if he thinks he can master unparalleled martial arts just by entering there, he's very mistaken and will end up just browsing the titles without even reading them. The MC thinks that it's just as his father said, that there are many manuals indeed, and even if he were lucky and found the best martial art, it would be at a similar level to the crescent sword art he has already learned, and says he wants to test his luck. His father looks at him and says he doesn't know his sly intentions, but will allow him to enter the library for 7 days. The young master thanks him. Meanwhile, in the Celestial Library, the swordsman enters, and thinks that in his past life, he had returned to the Celestial Demon sect to retrieve an ingredient for his regression, the secret demonic soul. And since at that time he was considered eliminated, and it had been decades since he left the cult, his face was disfigured and unrecognizable. It took a long time, but he rose from a common warrior to a position where he could have a private audience with the leader. During that time, he heard about a specific martial art of the leader of that era. 4 Steps of the Wind God is a supreme movement technique composed of only 4 steps. This technique was used to support the Celestial Demon's martial arts, but at some point it was lost to history and never passed on again. The one who obtained the 4 Steps of the Wind God was the sect leader at the time, and he remembers that the elder said finding the 4 Steps of the Wind God helped him reach the position of leader, and he found it in the Celestial Demon Library. The MC asks if the manual was there because they said it was lost. The elder replies that it was because it wasn't archived like a regular book. In the present time, the young master is inside the library. He crouches down and remembers when he asked where the book was. The elder replies that it was used as support for the 19th shelf. In the present time, the swordsman picks up the book, observes it, and realizes it really was there. He opens the book and smiles. The 4 Steps of the Wind God consisted of precisely 4 forms: Shadow Step, Flash Step, Underworld King Step, and Swift Step. The first form, Step of Shadows, is an infiltration technique, and it helps avoid the gaze of a single person. But as mastery increases, it is said that once perfected, the user could disappear even under the gaze of dozens. The second form, the Flash Step, is a defensive maneuver to find a way to escape an inevitable attack. It is an evasion technique that, without fail, finds a path to survive. The third form, the Underworld King Step, is an aggressive technique that nullifies any defense or escape by the opponent. And the last form, the Swift Step, demonstrates the supreme pinnacle of speed. The MC is still sitting on the ground with eyes closed. 7 days later, in the Heavenly Demon Hall, the young master returns. He enters his father's room. The leader observes him and asks what martial art he learned in the Heavenly Demon Library. The swordsman replies that it is a movement technique, the 4 Steps of the Wind God. His father says not to speak nonsense as it was lost years ago. The MC replies that he would not dare to lie about something like that. The leader stares at him and tells him to demonstrate the martial art. The young master asks what he will receive in return if he proves it is true. His father takes a deep breath and replies that he will let him live. The swordsman smiles, closes his eyes to concentrate. The leader remains alert and a mana begins to be emitted around the MC. He opens his eyes and uses the 4 steps of the wind god and the step of shadows. His father watches, very surprised to see his son performing the technique, and asks where he learned the 4 steps of the wind god. The young master looks at him and says he learned it in the heavenly demon library. His father asks if he is lying. The swordsman says nothing, and the leader says the library didn't have that technique. The MC replies that he is sure he learned it there. His father asks if he will still continue lying. The young master asks if he can be sure he has seen all the secret manuals that were there, as the manual might have been placed on a different shelf. The leader looks at him and asks if he's sure they weren't there just because he read many books from the library. He replies that the book could have been stuck on another shelf where the movement technique manuals aren't. The two stare at each other and his father asks where it was. The swordsman answers that it was being used as support under a shelf, and he found it while fixing the shelf. The leader sighs and asks if he must have already destroyed the most important parts of the manual. The protagonist asks how he knows. His father responds that it's because he would have done the same. He climbs the stairs and tells him to recite the steps. The young master stays silent and thinks that he expected this, and his goal isn't to overthrow his father and take the place of the celestial demon. What he wants is to eliminate Hua and save everyone from the pavilion, and until his father passes the title to him, he intends to roam freely around the world, enjoying life and teaching the 4 steps of the wind. God to his father won't be a problem, and he says that he doesn't want to. The leader looks at him. The swordsman says that there is nothing for free in this world. His father stares at him and says that he remembers the technique he taught him in the hunting field was free. He replies that it served as payment for the drink he had in the hunting field. The leader listens to this and asks how he managed to hold himself back until now, being so cheeky. The protagonist answers that he held back until this point. His father asks what he wants. The young master smiles and says that he wants to learn the celestial demon's defense technique, which is a protective technique passed only to the celestial demon, and learning this is like having an extra life. The leader says that this is forbidden, as it can only be learned by the demon and the heir. The swordsman says he can teach it to him in secret. His father is surprised, and the protagonist says that the celestial demon's defense technique is an art that can be used without leaving any traces. The leader says nothing. The young master says that he's leaving now and tells his father to think about it. The leader says that the 4 steps of the wind god come first. The swordsman is surprised and wonders if he will really teach him the celestial demon's defense technique, and asks if he wants him to teach it now. His father asks about learning the 4 steps of the wind god and not teaching the defense technique. The protagonist replies that he doesn't suspect at all because he doesn't think his father would do something shameful in front of his own son. The leader says nothing about this and tells him to recite the steps. The young master says that he understands and starts speaking another language. His father listens, closes his eyes, and also starts speaking another language, and an aura emanates around him. The swordsman continues teaching him for a long time. The leader, still with his eyes closed and mana around him, opens his eyes. The protagonist asks if he wants him to speak again. His father responds that it isn't necessary, and the young master looks surprised, realizing that he has learned the technique, and it's still different from his own, and wonders if his father's unique interpretation is included in this technique, which is why it's so different from his. He's very surprised, and the leader says it's an incredible technique. The swordsman lowers his head, thoughtful, and wonders if even Hua could defeat his father, now that he has learned the technique. The leader says that now he will teach him the celestial demon's technique, and will only say it once. The protagonist responds that he understands. After some time, he appears with a wound on his forehead. Lee asks who dared to touch him, and the young master replies that it was his father who hit him. The subordinate stays silent, not knowing what to say. The swordsman remembers the moment when he was learning the technique and was sweating, thinking he managed to learn the technique, saying that there is a secret between them, and he is very happy about it until his father hits him and tells him to stop being insolent. In the present time, the protagonist asks if she's going to defend him, and Lee replies that she's someone who protects, not attacks. The young master thinks that she didn't used to make jokes or play around like that before. He calls her. He says that now he can't. The guard is confused, and the swordsman says that he promises to cure the side effects of her body petrification technique, and that she can wait just a little longer. The subordinate looks surprised and is left speechless. The protagonist says that he told the celestial demon that the sect needs to change in a way where no one needs to get stronger to the point of destroying their own body just to protect someone, and the sect must become a place where no one in the cult is forced to do what they don't want. He watches her, and Lee is surprised, with her eyes shining. The young master approaches and tells her to listen carefully. The guard replies that she understands. The swordsman says that starting today, she will be dismissed from her position as his personal guard. The subordinate looks shocked and becomes desperate. The protagonist says that he will now appoint her as the leader of the Ghost Division. Lee doesn't understand much and replies that there is no such squad. The young master smiles and says that this organization will be created just to follow all of his orders. The subordinate still doesn't understand. The swordsman asks if she accepts to be the leader of the ghost squad and follow him. They look at each other. Lee joins her hands and says she accepts the request. Elsewhere, people are talking. The protagonist is leaning against the wall, thinking that he told his subordinate that he is creating a unit under her command. But it's not as simple as it seems. The creation of any group requires a large amount of resources, both for creation and maintenance. To obtain the funds, he plans to use an accident that happened before he regressed. A man approaches, shouting that his name is Yang and that he will be the leader of the mission. Even though the reward is high, it is still a very dangerous task, and they should be on alert for any threat. Anyone who messes up will be eliminated by his hands. He asks the swordsman if only he received the recommendation from Officer Seo. He answers yes. Yang says he hopes the swordsman has some skills. The protagonist asks if he wants him to show them now. The mission leader tells him not to be arrogant, as in the world they live in, a head can roll like a dewdrop falling in the morning. The young master says that as long as he gets paid, he will do the job. He looks to the side and sees a mother and child, thinking that their mission is to take the two ladies safely to Nampyeong, and his goal is to save them both and avoid their eliminations, as happened before his return. The swordsman waves his hand, greeting the child. The little girl smiles. They enter the carriage while the men circle around with the horses. The mission leader tells them to stop there as they will rest and to eat well because they don't know when the next meal will come. People grumble about the dried meat being repeated, and a voice says, "It's that, or they will go hungry." The protagonist thinks that he learned that on this trip these warriors were ambushed, but in the investigations, not even their bodies were found, and in the end, no one discovered when or who did it, until someone starts coughing, vomiting what they just ate. Everyone begins to feel ill from eating the food. The young master asks if it's poison. He approaches the fallen bodies, and a voice says he should be like them now. The swordsman realizes that it was Yang who poisoned everyone's food. He says that he didn't eat the food they distributed. The mission leader draws his sword and says it would have been better if he had eaten and been eliminated all at once. The protagonist thinks that no one would have imagined that the mission leader himself would poison his own comrades, and says that it's pathetic to take the lives of his own companions just to get that dirty money. Yang says that with money, a lot of things can be done. The young master asks if he killed so many people just for fun. Someone approaches, saying that it looks like everything is finished. They are men wearing masks. The swordsman thinks they seem quite skilled. One of the men says it's better for them to get out of the carriage before he burns the cart with the two inside. The curtain opens and they exit. The man says they hid so well that it was difficult to find them. The mother, her eyes full of tears, asks him to at least save her daughter. No looks and says he will spare their lives, then shouts, asking if they expected him to say that so easily. And instead of thinking he's in control, they should kneel and beg for mercy. The child's eyes fill with tears, and her mother, desperate, says that if he spares her daughter's life, she will give 10 times more than they paid. No tells her to stop talking nonsense until a voice says that at this very moment, her father must have already been subdued and captured. The warrior notices something and realizes the protagonist is beside him, asking for his identity. The young master approaches and says that he's one of the mercenaries, and his mission is to protect the two ladies until their final destination. No asks if he's not one of them. Yang replies no and says he'll deal with him. The warrior says to eliminate him at once. The swordsman says that these guys betrayed their own master and asks if they still think they'll get paid as promised, and says that they will probably eliminate everyone and keep all the money. No asks what he means by saying they betrayed their own master. The protagonist replies that he just said that to avoid the child hearing something worse. The warrior says this mercenary is crazy to think he can speak like that. The young master says it seems he hit the wound perfectly. No tells his men to eliminate this guy first. The swordsman asks if Yang heard that he will be eliminated first. The mission leader looks to the side, only to be attacked. His eyes widen, and he is eliminated. No asks how this idiot can treat the mission so lightly and says that he knew putting this task in the hands of a mercenary would be a big mistake. The protagonist replies that in the end, this is the fate of those who choose this path. The warrior becomes even angrier and orders to eliminate him right away. His men approach the young master, and he quietly tells the mother to cover the child's eyes and ears. The woman covers them, and the swordsman, without difficulty, eliminates the men using the 4 steps of the wind god technique. No looks in shock, stepping back, his mouth agape as he watches his men's heads fly off and their bodies fall to the ground. He asks for the boy's identity. The protagonist says that it's him who should answer that question. The woman says his name and mentions that he was one of the vassals who guarded their house. She introduces herself as Gyeum, the daughter of the Lord of the Golden Mansion. The young master thinks he came disguised for a reason, and her father, Asu, was a great merchant, ranked among the 10 most influential in the Central Plains, the richest man in Fujian, and the owner of the Golden Mansion. He was betrayed by the guard he trusted and lost his life, and so did his daughter. No sees him from behind and thinks this is his chance. When he moves to attack with his sword, the swordsman quickly dodges the attack and then eliminates him. Guillaume is startled. The protagonist says that these guys always look in the wrong direction when attacking with a sword. Seon asks for help. The young master says that the situation has changed and the price has gone up. Guillaume says that no matter the price, they can pay, and she asks him to save her father. The swordsman smiles. Elsewhere, a man starts laughing, saying that he finally captured them, and the plan he had been preparing for 10 years has worked. But then he notices something wrong and asks about Quan. The protagonist replies that everyone was eliminated. The man asks who eliminated him. The young master answers that he was eliminated by a mysterious, handsome young man. The man asks what kind of description that is. The swordsman stays silent. The man's eyes widen, and he says that it was he who eliminated No. The protagonist says that at least he knows how to recognize someone. There are several armed men around, and the man says that if he saved the two women, he should have run far away and asks why he came back into the tiger's den. The young master asks where the tiger is, because all he sees are traitors who attacked their own master. The man watches him and thinks that this guy eliminated No and came here without a second thought, and even though he's surrounded, he remains calm. He's definitely not an ordinary person. He asks what he thinks about entering and talking over a drink, saying that despite the unusual encounter, he'll be a good host and offer a drink. The swordsman says that he won't be nice just because the man is being polite. The man orders his men to eliminate him. They move quickly toward him. The protagonist observes, draws his sword, and attacks quickly. One of the men says that he's too fast and ends up losing his head as well. The young master continues eliminating them, moving rapidly and cutting them down while the two women keep their eyes closed. The man watches as all his men are eliminated and asks the protagonist's identity. The swordsman answers that he's just a mercenary looking for money. The man asks how much he wants to leave. The protagonist says that it seems he has a lot of money. The man replies that yes, he has enough to change someone's life. The young master asks that if he has so much money, why did he do this? If he wanted to change his life, he should use his own money, but instead, he's using someone else's money, and still from the master he served. The man doesn't answer anything until a voice tells him to drop his sword. It's a subordinate holding the mansion's owner hostage. Sion becomes worried about her father. The man smiles and tells the protagonist to drop his sword, or the mansion lord will be eliminated. The protagonist raises his hand, releasing a long-distance attack that strikes the subordinate and eliminates him using the fourth technique of the crescent sword art. The man looks shocked, and the young master asks what he just said. The swordsman approaches him. The man becomes desperate and says to wait a moment. The protagonist tells him that if he doesn't want to be eliminated, he should come at him. The man watches him and thinks that after a blow like that, the protagonist must have little internal energy left. He draws his sword and thinks he'll focus. The man attacks him. The young master blocks it. The man's sword hits the ground. He positions himself and attacks again. The swordsman dodges. The young man yells and charges at him, trying to hit him, thinking that it was as expected. He's exhausted all his energy and is just struggling to defend himself, and if he presses him a little more now, the protagonist strikes his sword into his chest and says that a human who should spend his life cultivating and improving himself is overtaken by greed, and even more so, he, who protects the Golden Mansion, was the last person he expected to see like this. The young man is eliminated and the sword is pulled from his chest. The family thanks him, and the mansion's owner says he will never forget that he saved the family from extinction, and asks if he can know his name. The young master replies that he's just a mercenary passing through. Guillaume says that even if the King of Wanderers had come, it wouldn't have been solved so easily, and that it's very kind of him to say that. Seon says that she promised him that payment would be in money. The Lord replies that she did well, and that this is the safest type of agreement one can make, and if money is what he needs, he's in the right place. The swordsman thinks that's why he disguised himself as a wanderer and helped them. They go inside, and the mansion's owner says that he saved their lives. So, it would be fair to give all their fortune, but that's not possible. The protagonist responds that he doesn't expect that much. Guillaume says he can take as much as he can carry at once. The young master wonders if it means take as much as he can carry. The Lord replies that it's without using carts or help from others, but he can use his own internal energy. The swordsman says he thinks he can carry a lot. The mansion's owner thinks it's fair to repay him this way. The protagonist watches him and thanks him. Guillaume opens a door. They observe. The young master walks inside, and it's all dark. The family watches him. Sion says that with his abilities, he will be able to carry more than he imagines, and asks if his father is fine with this. The Lord asks if there's anything more valuable than what they protected today, and says that the simple fact that they're alive is enough. The woman's eyes shine. The mansion's owner says that this young man is not an ordinary person, and what he saw in him goes beyond abilities, and thinks that he's met many people throughout his life. But even so, it's the first time he's seen a young person with such a serene and unique presence, and says that money can be earned again. But a connection with someone like this may only happen in this life, so it doesn't matter how much he takes. Sion observes and realizes that he exits from inside. Later, in the pavilion, the protagonist climbs the stairs and thinks that he sold the gold and treasures he brought from the Golden Mansion, and it was a large sum that seemed impossible to sell all at once in one place. Every city he passed, he sold a part of the treasure, and in this way, he managed to accumulate no less than 3,800,000 Nyang, and this money will be the foundation of his personal organization from now on. He enters his father's room and thinks that his father listens to Sima's reports several times a day and makes important decisions. These decisions determine who lives and who is eliminated, and wonders if his father is satisfied with this life, and if what happened with him and Lee made him act like the celestial demon too. The leader says that he knew he was out. The young master replies that he went to make money. His father asks the reason for the money. The swordsman responds that he can't live forever using his money, and besides, he will need quite a bit. The leader asks again why the money. The protagonist replies that he wants to have his own organization because the supreme demons also have their own subordinates, and to deal with them, he needs an organization. His father replies that this isn't possible because if he has this, his older brother will want it too, and he can't allow it. The young master thinks that he knew he wouldn't get his permission and shows his father a gift. The advisor doesn't understand. The leader extends his hand and uses his energy to take the gift and asks what money this is. The swordsman says that it's an allowance. He smiles, and Sima watches him. His father doesn't like it much, saying that he already has too much money. The protagonist says that he knows well that he is the richest, and the gift he's giving is from the heart, for having brought him into the world and raised him. His father doesn't respond, and the young master says that he always wanted to do this at least once. He descends the stairs. The leader watches him and smiles, and the advisor notices him smiling. The next day, in the Nirvana Pavilion, the swordsman is with his subordinate until someone arrives saying they came to take him. The protagonist turns around and faces Seo, saying that everyone is waiting. The young master smiles and becomes excited to see that he arrived. The investigator says that actually it was he who offered to help. The swordsman says he wouldn't have imagined that they'd meet again. They both smile. The protagonist focuses and walks. His guard follows him, and Seo does too. The three walk outside, and there are several people in line. They greet him, saying greetings to the leader of the pavilion. The young master observes them and thinks that their looks are friendlier than he expected, and asks if by any chance they were threatened with having their salary cut if they didn't pretend to greet him properly and why the atmosphere is so good. The investigator answers that it's because of what he did. The swordsman sighs and thinks that, according to the army's investigation, the leader of the first squad, Dang, eliminated the first investigator they sent and injured the second, took care of the injured investigator with the healer, and even crushed Dang, and those who saw this might have thought he eliminated him for revenge. Seo asks why he doesn't make a speech. The protagonist looks at them, his hair flying, and continues to watch them, beginning to say that he doesn't know if they will be happy or more unhappy with him as the leader of the pavilion, but there is one thing he can guarantee, that he swears to make their hearts beat stronger than ever before. The investigator looks somewhat confused. The subordinates look at each other and start laughing. Inside the pavilion, the young master holds a paper in his hand and asks if he gave this to him just to annoy him. Seo answers that it's the unresolved case his lord just asked to review. The swordsman asks why it's related to the bloody heaven again. The investigator says that he didn't want to bring this up either, but it's a recent case and fits the criteria his lord mentioned. The subordinate tells him to hold on, as they say the bloody heaven is on the verge of exploding. The protagonist says that letting it slide because of this is unacceptable, and the injustice in this case is too great, and tells her to read the paper and try to ignore it. Lee begins to read and agrees with him that it can't be ignored. In Pengyu Pavilion, someone slams a cup onto the table. A man is crying. The bar owner tells him to stop drinking. The young man asks how he could not drink when the guys who put his son in a coma for 10 days were considered innocent. The bar owner says he heard that Nirvana Pavilion is investigating. The young man keeps drinking and says that the person responsible for the case said that his son got hurt during a friendly duel with his friend, and he also heard that the father of the boy responsible for the incident with his son is known as the White Blade Demon, a subordinate of Bloody Heaven and the leader of the 100 Demons. The bar owner finds this absurd, and the young man says that all the Nirvana Pavilion investigators are the same. The owner tells him to lower his voice as someone might hear. The young man says he doesn't care if they hear. The owner says he needs to calm down. The young man cries and says that if his son doesn't wake up, His wife won't be able to bear living, and he's going to eliminate that guy and then take his own life. Someone approaches, asking if he thinks he can eliminate him. It's a group of warriors. The young man watches them, and the group approaches, asking who he thinks he is to say he'll eliminate someone else's precious son. The young man quickly stands up and says to bring his son back, and they didn't even apologize. The boy says he's sorry and that he committed an unforgivable sin, and that it will never happen again. And he bows and asks if he's satisfied. The young man is confused. The group starts laughing. The young man, irritated, draws his sword, but the boy is faster and strikes him with a punch, saying that everyone saw that he pulled the sword first. The rest of the group responds that they are witnesses. The boy climbs on top of the fallen man and starts hitting him while saying that this is his son's fault, who, when he was told to steal the money from home, said he couldn't because it was money his father earned with blood and sweat. The young man says he just confessed with his own mouth. The boy asks what he just confessed. The young man, gravely injured, says that everyone heard why he hit his son and it was assault, not a duel. The boy observes, looks to the side, and asks if anyone there heard what he said. Everyone in the place stays quiet and lowers their heads. The boy looks and says that no one heard. The young man's eyes fill with tears and begin to fall. People start laughing. The boy says that he's crying like a baby in front of others, and that he and his son are the same. His group laughs loudly and a voice approaches saying that they heard. The protagonist approaches with his group. The boy stands up and asks who he is. The young master watches him and says that he's rude. The boy looks and apologizes, saying he got very agitated and asks if he can forgive his lack of control. He starts laughing and asks if he thought he would say that. The swordsman smiles and says that seeing the White Blade Demon's son abusing power like this in broad daylight shows just how big his father's influence is. The boy is surprised, and the injured man recognizes him. The people are surprised to learn that he is the young master. The boy is startled, and the protagonist says he's there as the leader of Nirvana Pavilion. Lee asks if that won't make him even more nervous. The boy apologizes for not recognizing someone so important from their sect and admits he's a fool for not recognizing him. The young master thinks he's a clever kid, knows exactly when to lower his head, almost like an instinct, and says that he came after him for a reason. The boy looks alarmed and asks why. The swordsman stares at him and says that he's there to investigate the assault he recently committed. The boy says that Nirvana Pavilion already declared his innocence. The protagonist replies that yes, and they decided to reopen the investigation, and from their investigations he stole money every day and forced others to steal with him, and put his friend in a critical situation with assaults, which is attempted murder. As if that wasn't enough, he also went after the victim's father and assaulted him. And the crimes are very serious. He should spend at least 20 years in prison. The boy looks shocked and says that it was just a friendly duel that ended this way. The young master says that he just heard his confession and heard everything. The boy says that if he tries to incriminate him, his father won't let this slide. The swordsman smiles and says that his father is too busy to take care of it, and he's thinking of arresting him as well for trying to interfere with Nirvana Pavilion's investigation. The boy screams, asking if he thinks his father will let him be, and that he'll get revenge when he gets out of prison, and can eliminate him even from inside prison. The protagonist strikes him. The boy is flipped upside down and falls to the ground coughing. The young master says that threatening him adds 10 more years to the sentence, making it 30 years in total. The boy, coughing, asks for forgiveness. The swordsman watches him and tells him to stop talking about his father and dares him to give just one reason to forgive him. The boy is left speechless. The protagonist asks if he's ever saved anyone, helped with anything, and tells him to at least say something vaguely good he's done. And if he makes something up, he might consider it. The boy doesn't respond. The young master says he's done nothing good and asks why he should forgive someone like him. The boy says he promises to be a good person from now on. The swordsman strikes him, making blood spurt from his mouth. The people look shocked, noticing that it hurt. The protagonist tells him to live as he wants after he gets out of prison. The young master looks to the side at the rest of the group and they say they were just following orders. The swordsman says that if they don't tell the truth as well, they'll end up taking the blame and tells them to take them to the cell. The subordinates move toward them. The other people in the bar watch, and the protagonist says that if any of them face injustice one day, they should seek Nirvana Pavilion, because as long as he is the leader there, no outside interference will be tolerated. The people look impressed. The young master continues saying that if another guy shows up threatening to bring his father, he'll bring his own. Everyone looks and starts laughing. Lee approaches the victim's father and says that before they came here, the healer examined his son. The young man is surprised, stands up, asking if the esteemed lord took care of his son. The swordsman says his son is very precious, and before he got here, he saw him wake up. The young man's eyes fill with tears and he starts crying again, thanking him, saying he'll never forget this kindness. The protagonist asks if he didn't dedicate his whole life to their sect and says that it's fair that the sect should protect him. The young man extends his hands, holding his, and thanks him again. The investigator and the subordinates smile, and the people around are moved. The young master smiles and says that it's their sect that should be thanked. In the pavilion, the swordsman observes the subordinates and thinks that he expected the first reaction to come obviously from bloody heaven, but no one would have imagined that this reaction would come from an unexpected place, from within the organization itself. The special investigator says that he should have personally looked into the office, but there are too many and they ended up committing this discourtesy. The protagonist asks why they're all gathered here. He replies that he heard they reopened a case that had already been concluded as innocent by their pavilion. The young master agrees. Gok says that they believed this attitude harms the credibility and authority of the pavilion's investigators. The swordsman simply observes. Mai asks if his men also think that. They answer yes. The protagonist says that he thinks differently and believes that the Young-ho case is what severely shook the authority of their pavilion. Gok asks what he means by that. The young master asks if they heard that when they arrested Young-ho, he confessed everything in front of everyone. They respond that they heard. The swordsman asks again why they are here. Mai answers that they are here to question the decision to reopen a case that was already concluded. The protagonist asks if this is a matter of principles. Gok answers yes. The young master takes a deep breath and says that an innocent person was almost eliminated by being beaten, and the guilty one was arrested and confessed the crimes, and asks if they don't think it was obvious that the investigation needed to be reopened, and how they think they will be seen defending principles in this context. Mai says that even if they say it's outdated, it doesn't matter, and for an organization, principles are of utmost importance. The swordsman takes another deep breath and says that they will see how each person thinks, and tells those who believe reopening was the right decision to go to one side. The subordinates are unsure of what to do, and someone moves to the side. The protagonist observes, and it's Seo saying that he also believes this case needed to be reopened. The young master asks why, and he answers that the investigation was insufficient, and they can't rule out the possibility of external interference. The swordsman asks if anyone else agrees with this opinion. One of them says that he thinks so too. Iko introduces himself and says that he's very grateful for the help. The protagonist realizes that he's the one who was attacked by Dong and asks about his body. He answers that he's fine now. The young master says that it's good to hear that. He watches them. The protagonist calls for John and asks if he was the one responsible for this case, and what his opinion is. John answers that he conducted the investigation properly. The young master watches him and asks if he by any chance received a bribe. Gok asks how he can say something like that. The swordsman emits mana around him and says that he didn't give him permission to intervene. The official investigator looks shocked, and the protagonist asks again if he received money from the White Blade Demon. John answers no and swears on his life, and if they don't believe him, they can investigate. The young master smiles and says that he's already investigated and found that he really didn't receive money. They ask if he investigated his own investigators, because only the investigation has permission for that. He answers that he received direct orders from the master. Gok is in shock when he hears this. The swordsman asks if he didn't receive money, why he covered up the case. John answers that he didn't do that. The protagonist asks if he was threatened with losing his sister, and says that when he investigated him, he noticed that he was an upright person, but didn't trust and continued investigating. And yet, he was really an honest man. He asks why someone like that would have covered up the case, and says that he then discovered that he has a big weakness, that his only family is his sister. Gok asks if he really threatened him and repeats the question again. The young master thinks he knows why Gok is so involved in the case, because John is his favorite subordinate, and he got involved to ensure that his subordinate wouldn't suffer harm because of the case. He says that if he's worried about his sister, he can be at peace, because he's already sent a warrior to protect her, and she will be safe until the case is completely resolved. John asks if that's really true. The swordsman replies that yes, and John's eyes fill with tears. He kneels on the ground and says that he committed an unforgivable sin and cries heavily. The swordsman says that even if he was threatened, it doesn't justify what he did. John, still crying, says that he's ready to accept the punishment. All the investigators observe. The protagonist tells him to stand up and says that if this had happened after he became the pavilion's leader, he wouldn't have forgiven him. But since it happened before his arrival, he will forgive him this time. John asks if he's really forgiving him. The young master replies that yes, and says that it's not himself who is forgiving him, but the previously upright life that made him be forgiven, and that he should know that the integrity accumulated throughout his life was completely destroyed by this incident, and that he can start over and rebuild everything from the beginning. John thanks him several times. The swordsman says that their family is like his own. Anyone who messes with their family will be destroyed personally by him, and from now on, the pavilion will not accept any kind of external interference. And in addition to protecting them, he will not let those who mess with them go unpunished, and if they are threatened, they can come to him, and he will protect them, and they can trust the sex master. He will beg his father and ensure that they are saved, and if there's any external interference, they can report it immediately, and he will make sure they can carry out their work with dignity. The swordsman looks at them and says that when they are sure their family is safe, Nirvana Pavilion will operate as it should, and he believes that no matter who it is, anyone who commits crimes must pay for them, even if the mistakes were committed in the Celestial Demons Pavilion, and he will not let them go unpunished. Even if the sect master commits a crime, he too will have to answer for it. They look attentively, and the protagonist says that he is not afraid of the sect master, nor of the 8 supreme demons. And what scares him is what makes them foolish, that they can't protect those they need to protect, and that they let those who deserve punishment escape with a smile on their face. It might be late, but he wants to ally with the pavilion leader on this mission. They look at each other. Seo says the name Jo Hyang. They speak softly among themselves. A sound is made until everything goes quiet. Gok walks, and the young master says that to make his commitment a reality, he will need experience and help, and asks if they can assist him. The special investigator watches. The swordsman smiles. Gok thanks him and holds his hand. The protagonist looks at their hands holding each other and orders Seo to immediately take the execution warriors to arrest Tae and Young's father. The special investigator says that he won't surrender easily and also has the 100 demons as his subordinates. The young master tells them to let them do whatever they want, but if Yang doesn't come, they will accuse him of treason. The investigators look at each other and stay silent. Elsewhere, Tae is sitting. The swordsman says he should call him the leader of Nirvana Pavilion. The White Blade Demon looks at him and admits his mistake, asking what treason means on the summons. The protagonist says it was the only way he could get an audience. Tae thinks for a moment and apologizes for not surrendering, saying that there are many situations where things need to be carefully measured, and also the concern of keeping appearances in front of subordinates. The young master says he understands. The White Blade Demon continues, saying that from the beginning, this wasn't something that should have escalated, it was just a child's game, and he thought he would be someone he could talk to, and that he will need a lot of external help in the future and also a lot of money. The swordsman thinks he's trying to be polite, but in the end, he's offering a bribe. Tae says that to become the official heir, he will need their help. The protagonist responds that if he helps, he will be satisfied. The White Blade Demon says that from now on, he will serve him in the best way possible and has also organized a pleasant event soon. The young master asks where he is going. Tae asks if they haven't finished the conversation. The swordsman says he thought the intention was to help him once he gets out of prison. The White Blade Demon is shocked and asks about the unpleasant joke. The protagonist asks if it sounds like a joke as he is talking about the accusation of threatening the family of an investigator from Nirvana Pavilion. Tae repeats that he never did such a thing. The young master says that his testimony doesn't matter, and they've already accepted the testimony of the threatened investigator, and the sect has a clear rule that the testimony of Nirvana Pavilion's warriors takes priority over any opposing testimony. And this rule was created to protect the authority of the pavilion's investigators who enforce the sect's laws, and he probably didn't know that and only discovered now, all because of people like him. And there are many who think they can get everything through stubbornness. And if he confesses, his sentence will be reduced to 10 years. But if he denies, it will be 20 years. And there is no more room for negotiation. The White Blade Demon asks if he's crazy. The swordsman replies that if necessary, he'll go crazy with pleasure, because dealing with people like him in one's right mind is impossible. Tae asks why he is doing this. The protagonist asks why, and says that his son almost eliminated a friend by assaulting him. And it wasn't just a random fight, he pursued and tormented him for years, every day. And as the father of the boy, he threatened to eliminate the investigator's family just to cover up the case. The White Blade Demon asks if he thinks they are like the depot guards, and says that he should treat them as superiors. The young master glares at him and says that it's a sad and at the same time terrifying comment. Tae doesn't quite understand. The swordsman says that from now on, it won't be like this anymore. The White Blade Demon says that if he messes with him, bloody heaven won't stay still. The protagonist says that it will, because even when he eliminated the army leader, he did nothing. Tae slams his hand on the table, breaking it in half. He glares at him with great anger. The young master asks if he's also going to threaten his family. The White Blade Demon stays silent, and the swordsman says that his time is running out and that he should confess immediately. The protagonist leaves the room and thinks that perhaps the reason they are crumbling isn't just Hua, because even the sword demon dares to threaten an investigator from Nirvana Pavilion and still try to intimidate him covertly. The sect's discipline is completely destroyed, and he wonders if in his past life they fell only because of Hua. He walks and observes Bloody Heaven, heading in his direction. The old man has a glass in his hand and drinks, telling him to come closer. The protagonist doesn't respond at first and approaches. Bloody Heaven tells him to sit and drink together. The young master continues approaching and sits with him. The old man says that he's sure he warned him that nothing good comes from frequent encounters. The swordsman says that it's always him who seeks him out. They stare at each other. The old man drinks his drink and says that recently there was a moment when he felt something new about him. When he won the martial arts tournament and made that request to the sect leader, he shouted inwardly. And he was really clever to make such a request. The protagonist says that even he thinks it was a good request, but that was just the beginning. The drink is placed back on the table. Bloody Heaven says that he made his sword cry. The young master asks if it's really his fault that his sword cries, and says that it cries in mourning, that his disciples humiliated him in the martial arts tournament. One of his disciples chased him and insulted his subordinates. His younger brother exploited the demonic army for personal gain, and his subordinates threatened to eliminate a Nirvana Pavilion investigator. And his sword cries in mourning for those close to the master who didn't live up to his character. The old man says that he's gone mad and is wrong. The swordsman wants to know what's wrong. Bloody Heaven says that he said those close to him don't live up to his character. And that's not true. They are a perfect match for his character. And that's the kind of person he is. The protagonist stays silent and thinks that this old man is no ordinary person, and those soaked in pride or with a great sense of honor are easier to deal with. The old man says to release Tae, who is imprisoned, and because of him, the morale within the sect is at an all-time low. The young master says that if the investigation proves his innocence, he will be released. Bloody Heaven doesn't say anything, but emits a large, frightening energy. The swordsman thinks that, as expected, his demonic energy is on another level, and now it makes sense why his father said it wasn't the right time yet. The old man says that he will give him a piece of advice. The protagonist says not to do that. Bloody Heaven doesn't understand much. And the young master says that if he came to make a request, just make it, but don't offer any advice or warnings along with it. The old man stays silent and stops emitting energy. He looks at him, looking down and saying that he's right and that lately it's been rare to speak to someone who speaks directly. The swordsman says that he must stay vigilant because still waters tend to stagnate. Bloody Heaven looks at his reflection in the drink and asks who would want to stagnate. When someone plunges into something, they grow attached to it and sometimes they miss the opportunity to let go. The protagonist says to take the opportunity to let the water flow because these people are not worthy of his protection. The old man listens quietly, drinks his beverage, and asks if he will accept his drink. He extends his hand with the drink. The young master takes it, and Bloody Heaven says that he will let the stagnant water flow. The swordsman takes it and says that he is wise, and the old man says that from now on, he wants him to be as water. The protagonist doesn't understand much and wonders what he means. Bloody Heaven says that if he wants to become the celestial demon, he needs to drink this and he will support him. The young master is surprised by the offer and thinks that he is someone known for supporting his older brother and wonders if he is willing to abandon him and asks if he wasn't one of his brother's supporters. The old man answers that this was before he discovered that he is a lunatic. The swordsman thinks that this old man is willing to sell everything for ambition, eliminated his younger brother, crippled the disciple, and imprisoned the subordinate, and says that he doesn't understand because he eliminated his brother. Bloody Heaven observes, lowers his head, and says that when someone leaves the care of their parents, they become just a stranger, and asks if he thinks losing family causes an unbearable pain, and says that a thorn under the nail is more painful than the death of a relative. And he didn't formally ally with his brother, nor did he make any concrete promises. The protagonist asks if gaining his support would be like having an army of thousands, and asks why he is choosing him. The old man looks at him and answers that it's because his madness gives him the confidence to place his destiny in his hands. The young master asks if he's choosing him because he's a lunatic. Bloody Heaven answers yes. The swordsman looks at him, laughing, and thinks that if he had the mentality of a young man at this age, maybe he would have been swayed by the arrogance of being chosen and completely trusted his words. But he knows the strategies that old men use to manipulate the young. The way he said he wants to become the celestial demon made it seem like he can make that happen. The protagonist places the glass on the ground and says that while he appreciates his high esteem for him, he now has a responsibility to fulfill, and he asked what his father would think of this. If he hears that he neglected his duties to get involved with politics, he would say he's not fulfilling his responsibility. Bloody Heaven asks about fulfilling the task as the leader of Nirvana Pavilion. And if the sect leader keeps him in that position, he wouldn't rot in it for the rest of his life. The old man says that the path he must choose is only one, to become the successor or not. but it's a fact that the sect leader would notice if he aligned himself. Just the fact that he chose him would make him stand out and attract everyone's attention. The young master says that he's not wrong, but there's something he's overlooking. The determination to maintain the sect's discipline is not just his will but also his father's, and he tells him to let him think about it. And he will drink this once he makes his decision. Bloody Heaven stares at him and says that he thinks it's fair and this is the right way to handle the situation. And only a fool would drink just because someone told him to. He grabs his sword and moves, attacking. The swordsman blocks, and the old man says that he will listen to him tomorrow. The protagonist replies that he will respond in 5 days. Bloody Heaven says that he will listen in 3 days. He moves quickly, leaving. The young master lowers his guard and says that this one hurt. Elsewhere, someone is with their fist on the ground, and there are several people with wood on their backs. The chief asks if they are already giving up, because this is just the basic training of the demonic army's battalion, and asks if Nirvana Pavilion members can't even handle this. Anne tells them to hold on tight because anyone can betray them, but efforts never will. Co says that Zhang isn't even married and is talking about women and children. The protagonist smiles and agrees. The investigator asks how he managed to get Nam to apologize formally, as they can't even imagine them admitting mistakes and apologizing publicly. The young master says that since that's the case, they can ask them if they're curious and find out why they did it. The investigator says not to joke with that because if he did, he wouldn't come back alive. He answers that he could go dance in front of the training pavilion and nothing would happen. Co stays silent, and the swordsman remembers what Bloody Heaven said about waiting for his answers, and says that regarding the White Blade Demon and his son, to contact the prison and put them in the worst cell available, and they must be held accountable for what they did. The investigator responds that he understands. The protagonist thinks that if he hadn't intervened, they would have lived their lives normally, while the Gua family, the victims, would have suffered a miserable fate. Because of people like them, there must be countless victims like the Gua that he never heard of, and there will be more in the future. And he can't let people like that go unpunished anymore. In Magashan, people are watching and asking if this is Nirvana Pavilion's branch. The young master answers yes, and that from now on, if anyone from the main sect messes with him, they can go there and report it. They look happy with the accomplishment. And the swordsman asks what the people of Magashan did when they were wronged by the artists. They ask what they could do. The protagonist watches them and thinks that they probably just kept quiet and moved on, and those who knew about Nirvana Pavilion probably did nothing. To even enter the pavilion, one must declare their purpose at the sect gate, undergo identity checks and body searches, and repeat the process multiple times before reaching the pavilion. And he says that from now on, if the issue involves a martial artist from the main sect, they can go to the Nirvana Pavilion branch and report it. They are surprised and ask if this is true. The young master answers yes and tells them to spread the word, and not to worry about possible retaliation. If any sect member tries something during an investigation, they will be executed. The Lord thinks that this guy really opened this branch for their benefit, and says that he will make sure to tell everyone. The swordsman smiles, walks, and thinks that this is just the beginning, and he will protect all the people of Magashan, from the low-level martial artists to all the weaker ones who suffer injustice. There's only one principle he follows, that all lives are equal, and he will follow this principle. He looks out the window, stares intently, leaves the pavilion, and Bloody Heaven asks if he's now ready to drink together. The protagonist sits and responds yes. The old man watches him, places the drink on the table. They stare at each other. After the drink is poured into the cup, the bloody sky tells him to drink. The young master observes him and says he needs snacks. The old man asks what kind of snacks. The swordsman replies that it's the demon army. The bloody sky looks surprised, and the protagonist tells him to feed him with the demon army. The old man doesn't respond at the moment, he just looks. Then he says there is a natural order to follow in things. The young master asks if it's not part of the natural order to have snacks while drinking. The bloody sky extends his hand, placing it on his own head, and says he gave him 3 days, and now comes with an absurd condition. He strikes the ground and says he will take his head. The old man attacks, causing large impacts around, but the swordsman manages to block. The bloody sky says it's impressive, and asks if he used a lot of internal energy, and says it seems his head won't come off so easily. The old man attacks again. The protagonist moves and blocks again, emitting an extremely bright light radiating around the area and causing a great impact. The young master is pushed back. The bloody sky watches him being pushed back. He continues staring intently and smiles, saying it's very interesting, and repeats it again. The swordsman, irritated, thinks he wants to fight using the 4 steps of the wind god, and wonders if his opponent can face the step of the king of the underworld. He observes, then looks down. thinking it's not the right time yet, and that time is on his side, so it doesn't make sense to risk a dangerous fight with his limited internal energy. And says to give him control of the demon army. The old man asks who he wants to appoint as the commander of the army. The protagonist says to appoint Zhang. The Bloody Sky asks if he is his ally and says that if he desires too much, he will end up paying the price. The young master says it was he who suggested devouring everything with his madness and also proposed they unite, and the paths walked by lunatics are never normal. The old man remains silent, thinking, and asks about the lunatic. The swordsman says another person might hesitate and wonders how he wouldn't form an alliance with himself. The Bloody Sky says nothing, and the protagonist thinks that he is not sure of the final goal of his ambitions, as he was eliminated before discovering and revealing that to the world, and remembers that the first to be eliminated among the 8 supreme demons was the Bloody Sky, and wonders why he, meticulous and astute, was the first to fall. The old man watches him, smiles, and agrees. The young master says it was his greed that devoured everything. The Bloody Sky leaves quickly. The swordsman watches him and thinks that the old man won't be able to refuse his proposal because he knows better than anyone that besides his banquet, there are still 7 other banquets. 10 days later, Zhang asks what is going on and says the Bloody Sky recommended him as the leader candidate for the demon army, asking if it was his doing. The protagonist thinks his evaluation was right and answers that he asked him. The commander says he appreciates the faith placed in him, but this position is beyond what he can handle. The young master says it's just the position the former leader occupied before he eliminated him, and if he leads as he did when he was the 3rd commander, he will be the best leader of the demon army in history. Zhang widens his eyes and says he thinks he's underestimating him. The swordsman says perhaps he is underestimating himself, and either way, since there are other candidates being considered, they will have to wait. The commander responds that he understands. The protagonist watches and thinks he plans to act quickly to make things happen his way. Elsewhere, his father is in front of him. The young master stares at him for a moment and asks if this is a new protective armor. His father responds no, it's his pajamas. They both remain silent, and the leader asks what kind of business needs to be dealt with in the middle of the night. The swordsman responds that the night hasn't even begun yet and asks if he's going to sleep so early, because if the Martial Artist Alliance finds out. His father interrupts him and tells him to get straight to the point. The protagonist says he wants to use the Bloody Sky as his sword. The leader sighs and asks if he didn't say he was going to eliminate him. The young master responds that he thinks that's a waste. His father doesn't say anything, and the swordsman thinks this shouldn't be news to him, as when the Bloody Sky recommended Zhang, he must have realized they made an alliance. The leader stares at him and says that the Bloody Sky won't be as easy to tame as a sword. The protagonist responds that he will use him until he breaks. After all, he's not valuable enough to collect yet. His father asks if he will cut him. The young master replies that he will be cut, but there's a difference between the two because when he breaks, it will be the end. But if he himself is cut, he will become even stronger. The leader says that talking is easy and asks why he is telling him this. The swordsman responds that now that he receives the salary given by him, it's natural for him to inform him. His father asks if he didn't come to ask if he accepts the Bloody Sky's recommendation. The protagonist answers no and says not to allow it under any circumstances. The leader is confused, and the young master says that he intends to take advantage of the opportunity to crush the Bloody Sky, because in his presence he's so arrogant that sometimes he seems to think he's more important than his own father, and he will put an end to this presumption of his. The leader asks if he's willing to give up the army just to crush him, and tells him to stop with the nonsense and tell the truth. The swordsman says that actually there's something to gain, and for that he can't get what he wants right now. His father asks if there's something more important than the demon army. He replies yes, and says he will make everything his. The leader doesn't respond and turns away, telling him to leave and take the jokes with him. The protagonist stares at him and thinks that at least tonight, nothing will be funnier than his pajamas. Elsewhere, the celestial demon says that even if it's not to the sect master's liking, the young master has been standing out inside the sect lately and asks if this isn't his doing. The Bloody Sky says that the young one is the work of the sect master, and only now has he realized how incredible this work is. The leader says he's still immature. The old man says that's exactly why he's saying he would like to mold the young master into an even better work. The celestial demon says that if he takes this on, it will be a great opportunity for the second son. The Bloody Sky thanks him and asks if he could support him in something else. The leader asks what he means. The old man says to allow him to proceed his way. The celestial demon remains silent and remembers his son saying not to let him have permission to decide and says this issue is complicated, and since he's already supported the second son enough, he needs to think about the first one too. The Bloody Sky says that one thing he learned while teaching a disciple is that when supporting someone, one should support just one person with full dedication, and by not doing so, he has been heavily criticized. The leader says he doesn't care, that unlike him, who is generous, he eliminates everyone who criticizes him. The old man says nothing, and the celestial demon asks if he has anything else to say. The bloody sky replies, no. He leaves and wonders about starting to rethink everything now, thinking that when he decides to support, he must go all the way. Elsewhere, the old man says the sect master is more inclined to think about the eldest son than him. The protagonist asks if it's true. He becomes thoughtful and says he thinks their union was a mistake, because if he's surpassed by his brother, he should fill the gaps that are missing. The bloody sky asks if he's implying he's insufficient. The young master replies that it's a little disappointing. The old man, irritated, says that making Zhang the leader of the army was never feasible from the beginning. The swordsman asks if he decided so early. The bloody sky replies that it doesn't make sense to insist on something impossible. The protagonist says he brags so much. The old man tells him to pay attention to how he speaks. The young master says he was the one who offered to be his support, and the bloody sky says it was the boy who insisted on doing something impossible. The swordsman says that in that case, he should have refused from the beginning, and the next day he shouldn't have recommended Zhang as the leader of the demon army. The bloody sky glares at him, irritated. The protagonist grabs his sword and strikes the ground, saying that he himself said before that this was the extent of the sect master's consideration for him, and he believed in that limit he mentioned. But in reality, the limit between his father and him seems to be this. The old man says nothing, and the young master watches him, thinking there's not much to say, and says that if it were him, he would have succeeded. The bloody sky glares at him and says to try it himself, asking if he didn't mock him for not being able to do it, and says it should be easy for him. The swordsman asks about asking his father and succeeding. The old man tells him to do whatever he wants, as he bets it will only have the opposite effect. The protagonist thinks he's sure of how he rejected his request, and he will never accept a request from his own son, and he knows his father very well. He asks if he's suggesting a bet. The bloody sky asks about the bet and says to do it, and if he also doesn't succeed, he will be his shadow without complaining and stop asking for unnecessary favors. The young master asks if, in case he succeeds. The old man doesn't respond and thinks for a moment, then says he will grant whatever request he wants. The swordsman says that if he succeeds, he wants him to obtain an elixir, something better than the demon essence pill. The bloody sky looks surprised and asks if he has any idea how difficult it is to obtain something better than the demon essence pill. He replies that this is why he is proposing the condition. They remain silent, and the protagonist thinks there is a reason for asking for an elixir, as there is a legendary one that grants much more internal energy than the essence pill. And he knows the old man has the celestial divine elixir. He says that if he couldn't make Zhang the leader of the army, he won't be able to get the elixir either, so he sees reason in making this alliance. The old man glares at him and says that if he makes Zhang the leader of the army, he will get the elixir. The young master draws his sword, says it's a promise, and points his sword at him. The bloody sky strikes his weapon against the sword and quickly leaves. The swordsman thinks that besides the essence pill he already took, if he can consume the celestial divine elixir, he will never lose a battle due to lack of internal energy again, not even against the supreme demons, and he knows how to win this bet. Elsewhere, the advisor asks about the possibility of Zhang becoming the leader of the demon army. The protagonist answers yes. Sima takes a deep breath and says it's practically impossible. The young master asks if it's still the case with the recommendation from the bloody sky. The advisor replies that this recommendation was already rejected by the sect master, and he is not someone who changes his mind without a solid reason. The young master responds that he knows that well and asks about obtaining the recommendation from another supreme demon. Sima doesn't quite understand. The swordsman remembers a woman. Meanwhile, the advisor is alone in his room, reading a book but distracted, pondering about two supreme demons recommending the same person, and remembering the moment when the swordsman was there and said this had never happened before. But if it does, there's a good chance Zhang will become the leader of the demon army, and the sect master would also have reason to change his mind. He asks if he thinks this is possible. The protagonist smiles and responds that it's just a matter of trying to find out, and sometimes it might be easier to face two tigers at once than one alone. In the present time, Sima asks if the other tiger is the supreme swordsman of the single-cut sword. Elsewhere, BIE is sitting, saying that these accusations are defaming him, and he wants a direct confrontation with her. The young master asks why he thinks these accusations are lies. BIE replies that he doesn't understand either, and it might be someone who manipulated this, or maybe he made some mistake with her, but at least he didn't attack her. The swordsman says they will arrange a direct confrontation. The protagonist calls for Zio. The investigator enters with a little girl. BAE quickly stands up, asking why he is doing this to him. The young master says that if he shouts again, the interrogation will be cancelled, and asks if this was the person who attacked her. The little girl nods, signaling yes. The accused asks where he got this lie from and says to look at her, she's shaking, and she's like that because she knows the lie will be uncovered. The swordsman asks if he's afraid. He asks if he's on the girl's side. The protagonist says he threatened her, telling her that if she spoke about the attack, he would go to her hometown and eliminate her family. BAE asks why he believes what she's saying. The young master signals to the investigator and other girls enter. He asks if he remembers them and says they are the girls who worked for him before. The accused says he remembers them, and they've grown a lot. The girls don't say anything, just watching in fear. The swordsman says he doesn't need to pretend innocence, as he already has all the testimonies. The method he used to attack these girls was always the same. Even the threats were identical. He manipulated them for 2 or 3 years and then swapped them for others. BAE says it was a mistake, as he was drunk and asked for forgiveness, saying there's never been a case where someone was arrested for this. The protagonist says that he should have studied this. The accused says it will never happen again, and if necessary, he'll sign a commitment. The young master responds that it won't be necessary as he won't go to prison. The girls look even more frightened. BAE thanks him. Then the swordsman strikes and beheads him, saying he's going somewhere else now. The accused's body falls to the floor. They look on surprised. Even Seo looks shocked. The protagonist says that those who torment them will be eliminated and their families are no longer in danger, and they can live their lives without fear from now on. He knows that what they've been through will never be forgotten, but since they can't forget, at least let them forget what happened today. He tells them to cover their wounds with this moment, where he paid for the crimes. He thinks that's the most he can do for these girls. They look at him and one of them thanks him. They get emotional and start crying heavily. They watch them crying, and the young master says they don't need to thank him, as they managed to punish him thanks to their courage in testifying. This was their justice, and may they continue living with courage from now on. They leave. The swordsman thinks about his father, and if they become blinded by the survival ideal of the strongest, then protecting these children will end with their heads being cut off by those his father detests so much from the Orthodox sect. If they keep going like this, their heads will roll and they can't complain if it happens. Then someone calls him. It's Lee asking if the men are from the Sword of the Northern Heavens, and that the Supreme of the single-cut sword won't let this pass, and asks if he's not afraid. The protagonist answers yes, and says he's afraid of being eliminated before eliminating all this trash. The guard says that since he became the leader of the Nirvana Pavilion, the sect is becoming kinder, and asks if this will end and they will be more virtuous than the Martial Arts Alliance. The young master responds that not attacking girls isn't virtuous. It's basic. The problem is that they couldn't even do the basics. He tells the investigator to inform the Supreme of the Sword right now and say that there was a problem in the interrogation process and he will personally explain. In the family of the Sword of the Northern Heavens, the swordsman arrives. A subordinate informs that the leader of the Nirvana Pavilion has arrived. The Supreme steps out and says, "Welcome." Although she appears to be in her 20s, the Supreme of the Sword was actually twice that age. There's a saying that the world may change, but she doesn't, and it seemed like she got younger every year that passed. The protagonist says it's been a while since they've seen each other. She says to call her veteran. The young master says that considering their relationship, that wouldn't be appropriate. The veteran asks if just because she's older she deserves respect, and says she doesn't think that way, and that respect is something given to those who deserve it. Just like younger people who deserve respect should receive it as well. The swordsman says he will follow her will, but in return, she can call him young master. He looks to the side and introduces the investigator who analyzed the recent case and brought it to report what happened. The Supreme says that if the Nirvana Pavilion has concluded that he is guilty, there's no reason to deny it, and anyone who attacks a young person deserves the end, and the family of the Sword of the Northern Heavens will not raise any issues about what occurred during the investigation of this case. The protagonist looks at Seo signaling. The investigator leaves them alone. So smiles and says he heard that, thanks to his efforts, a wind of change has been blowing in the sect lately, and that he's doing an excellent job. The young master says that this is thanks to her support. The veteran says not to exaggerate with compliments for her wrinkled face. The swordsman says she looks to be in her 20s. So says she's just someone who needs to retreat and seek understanding of martial truths. The protagonist is distracted, thinking that she lives a life very different from what her words suggest. After his father was eliminated by Hua and the sect was closed, the 8 supreme demons and other renowned masters of the sect fought for the position of sect master, and the first sect master after his father's death was her. During her time in power, there was constant bloodshed. If only she had political skills, her leadership couldn't keep up with her ambitions. And in the end, she didn't last 3 years in the position and lost her life to her successor. And in the present time, the young master says that when this case came to light, he was quite overwhelmed, as they had many recent conflicts with Nam's men. He thinks he mentioned Nam deliberately, who is led by the Bloody Sky to see her reaction. And among the 8 lords, the Bloody Sky and she have the worst relationship. Because of that, their followers also hate each other like dogs and monkeys. The swordsman says the Bloody Sky impresses him, and now there's another conflict. The Supreme says she's very different from him. The protagonist agrees. So observes and says that since they mentioned it, he heard he recommended Zhang as the leader of the demon army and asks what happened. The young master replies that Zhang is talented and loyal, and to be honest, he's one of his. The veteran asks how he convinced the Bloody Sky. He replies that he provoked him. The Supreme says that old man wouldn't be convinced by something like that. The swordsman responds that when it comes to pride, he thinks the only reason is that the Bloody Sky didn't want to lose to him, so doesn't say anything. The protagonist observes and says the Bloody Sky said something else, that among the 8 supreme demons, he's the one who cares most about the sect's well-being, and even then, not even he managed to make Zhang the leader, and the chief advisor suggested a solution, but it's also something difficult. The veteran asks what was suggested. The young master responds that another supreme should support the recommendation as well, but none of the other supremes are willing to do so. The supreme asks why he thinks there is no one. The swordsman doesn't understand much, so asks if he thinks the only supreme concerned with the sect is the old man. The protagonist responds that it's not that. The veteran asks if the reason he came to see her today is to ask for her recommendation for Zhang. The young master thinks she is wise, as she had already realized. And now it's time to be direct. When tricks and truths mix so much that one can't identify the origin, that's when strategy reaches perfection. He looks at her and thinks she must be full of doubts, because that old man would take the risky decision of abandoning his brother and choosing him. The Supreme, still quiet, watches him and says she now understands why the sect master placed him as the leader of the Nirvana Pavilion. The swordsman doesn't understand, so moves closer to him, looks him in the eye, and says that he has a curious way of touching people's hearts. She also says she will recommend Zhang. The protagonist is surprised. The veteran steps away and says this is to show that the old man isn't the only supreme who cares about the sect. The young master says he will never forget her help. He leaves and thinks he suspected she would accept to make the recommendation, maybe out of fear of being the ideal successor. And the Bloody Sky noticed this before she did. And if that's the case, she doesn't want to let the old man monopolize it. After all, she hates him deeply. As proof of that, the first person she eliminated when she became sect master was the Bloody Sky. In the pavilion, someone comments that they never imagined the young master would bring the Supreme into the game. The celestial demon says he must have used the rivalry between the two and asks if Zhang can take over the army. The advisor replies that in terms of skills, he's excellent, pure, almost without political influence, and it was a very smart choice by his son. The leader says it doesn't seem like he chose Zhang by accident. It was something emotional, and his son is more sentimental than he seems. Sima says it's both a strength and a weakness. The celestial demon says it's a weakness. The advisor asks how they will resolve the issue of the army leader. The leader replies that they'll have to accept, as they can't ignore the consideration of these people and that they can appoint Zhang as the leader of the army. Sima says he understands. Elsewhere, a voice says he doesn't know how he will repay the help. It's Zhang. He bows, as if thanking. The protagonist says that by his personality, he won't be able to repay. The commander doesn't understand. The young master says he made him the leader of the army for 2 reasons. The first is that he thought he was the most suitable for the role, and because he thought he was the most suitable for it. Zhang says he's flattered by his consideration. The swordsman says that the second reason is that he hopes the demon army will become his strength, and asks if these 2 reasons don't conflict. Zhang stays quiet. The protagonist says that an upright man like him won't be easy to maintain a personal relationship with, and he has no intention of forcing their friendship. The army leader observes and says that if he thinks he's the type to abandon personal relationships for the sake of the organization, he's wrong. The young master is surprised. Zhang asks if he remembers the first time they met and says he sent an anonymous letter because of the death of his friend, and it was for revenge. And he is a very emotional person who values personal relationships above all. The swordsman continues listening. The army leader says he wants to be loyal to him, and his greatest loyalty is to him. The protagonist watches him, thinking that he thinks he's found someone better than he imagined, and says that he counts on him from now on. Zhang says the same. The Bloody Sky is standing still. Someone approaches him, saying he looks like a stone standing there. The old man asks if he's calling him thick-headed. The young master replies, no. The Bloody Sky congratulates him for making Zhang the leader of the army. The swordsman thanks him and watches him, thinking that he thought the old man would explode with anger for bringing the Supreme into the game. But he seems calm still. He can't let his guard down. The old man asks how he managed to convince So. The protagonist watches him and says he will only tell him if he promises not to get angry. The bloody sky promises. The young master says he played with her pride, telling her that he was the true supreme. The bloody sky mutters, saying it was he who fell into the trap because she wouldn't have failed to notice the shallow intentions, and she will surely turn the game against him and probably use the excuse of having helped him to stop him in the future, and asks what he will do when that happens. The swordsman responds that his support is a priority. The old man says she might use the fact that she helped Zhang as an advantage. The protagonist says that he helped him first, so it's no problem. The bloody sky says that is what they will see. He takes a box and asks her to make a proposal that he can't refuse. The protagonist takes the box and replies that a promise is a promise. Then he looks surprised when he opens the box. The old man says that this is the celestial divine elixir. The young master wonders if he is really handing over the elixir so easily as he thought he would make excuses, say there was nothing good enough, or that it would be difficult to give away something so valuable. The bloody sky says he's kept this for a long time and has been reserving it. The swordsman asks if he's really giving it to him. The old man, irritated, shouts, asking if he wants him to take it back. He throws his sword on the ground and drinks his drink. He places the cup on the ground and calls for the boy. The protagonist hears. And the bloody sky says he's going to bet the rest of his life on him. The young master's eyes widen, and he doesn't know how to respond, thinking that he just put the most powerful card on the table and did it without hesitation. And he had told his father that he wasn't worth preserving, and he needs to correct that now. The swordsman clenches his fist, and he thinks that if he's acting so boldly, he must also value him in return and thanks him for trusting him. The old man sighs, and the protagonist asks if he can consume the elixir right there, and he could protect him while doing so. The bloody sky asks if he's serious about consuming it in front of him. The young master replies that he is. The old man looks surprised, and the swordsman thinks that protecting someone while they circulate their energy has symbolic meaning. It's the final stage of trust between martial artists. The bloody sky asks if he really trusts him. The protagonist responds that if he didn't trust him, he wouldn't consume the elixir, and if it were poisoned, he would have to do exactly what he told him to get the antidote. The old man asks why he would believe he wouldn't poison it. The young master replies that it's because he's not the type of person who would use such low methods. The bloody sky asks if his intuition is wrong. The swordsman replies that he'll think about that when the time comes. He places the elixir to his mouth. The old man watches, and the protagonist hopes it dissolves well. When it hits his stomach, the elixir breaks, emitting a strong light. Red blood cells move quickly, emitting an extremely powerful energy. The young master keeps his eyes closed while the light moves inside his belly, becoming more intense. Still sitting on the ground with his eyes closed, he opens them and thinks that thanks to the elixir, his internal energy has increased tremendously. And the bloody sky asks how the elixir tastes. The swordsman looks in his direction and responds that it was delicious, and he's never tasted anything so good in his life. The old man gets irritated, saying he should have just taken it without worrying about saving it. The protagonist stands up and says not to regret it because he made sure to absorb the elixir 10 times more in gratitude for trusting him. And he thinks that now, even against the bloody sky, no one will be able to say he lost because of a lack of internal energy. The bloody sky moves closer and asks his identity, and what is so special about him that intrigues him so much that he would give him the elixir. The young master stares at him. The old man continues to glare. The swordsman's eye emits light, and he responds that he's the one who will lead him in the future if he's still alive by then. The bloody sky watches him with a huge amount of energy surrounding him and says he has courage. The protagonist says he wants to clear up a doubt and asks what he really wants. The old man becomes thoughtful and responds that an old man like him doesn't want anything, just lives the way he always has, driven by inertia. The young master says that for someone with no desires, he seems quite passionate about certain things. The bloody sky doesn't understand much, and the swordsman says that when he pressured him like that, he seemed like a young man full of energy. It was like he could feel the flames burning. The old man asks if he seems that way. The protagonist replies that he does, and the bloody sky feels relieved and says he thought he had completely cooled down. The young master thinks he understands how he feels, and that no matter how much ambition, desire, or yearning, time always takes them away little by little. The swordsman watches him, walks, grabs the cup, and says to serve him a drink. The bloody sky looks surprised and says he lost this time. The protagonist replies that he won the moment he handed over the elixir without hesitation and will accept the drink. And he thinks he doesn't know if it will be possible, but from now on, he's decided to make the bloody sky one of his. The old man grabs the bottle and serves him. They stare at each other. The young master, with the cup in his hand, drinks the drink. The bloody sky watches and says they will work together from now on. The swordsman agrees and says that in the future, when he tries to use any tricks against him, He better be able to handle them. The old man asks about the trick and smiles. Unable to hold back, he starts laughing loudly. The protagonist says to serve him another one. The bloody sky pours more drink and the young master watches him, thinking that he's laughing openly now, but still hasn't fully opened his heart. And he's not someone who can be judged just by what is seen through the crack of a half-open door. What lies beyond that door he doesn't know, but the fate of the relationship will be decided the day that door fully opens. Whether he himself burns in his flames, whether he's eliminated by his sword, or if they become friends forever, that day will decide everything. Elsewhere, the swordsman is training with his sword, thinking that with his increased internal energy, his strikes have become even more powerful and faster, and now his strength is enough to fight the supreme demons in a life-or-death battle. He moves his sword and continues thinking that it's still not enough. He needs to accumulate more, and the more internal energy, the better. A voice approaches saying that his power has increased again, and it's his father. The protagonist replies that he received the elixir from the bloody sky. The sect master continues with the same expression, and the young master asks why he's not surprised, since he's talking about the divine elixir. His father replies that he said he had to gain something from him and already knew it was the elixir. The swordsman asks how he knew that. He replies that he himself gave it to him a long time ago. The protagonist is surprised and thinks that's what the old man wanted to make clear earlier, and in the end, he wasn't wrong. His father asks what he bet in the challenge. The young master replies that he bet himself. The sect master says that the old man made a bad deal. The swordsman says he's going to exploit the 8 supreme demons for every last cent. His father doesn't say anything. The protagonist finds it strange and thinks that normally he would have already said he's talking nonsense and asks why he's just listening. The sect master replies that it's because he thinks he might actually succeed. And the young master says that now he's really taking him seriously. His father turns his back and tells him to train. The swordsman thanks him for making Zhang the leader of the army. The sect master responds that it wasn't because of him, but because 2 supreme demons recommended him. The sect leader says he's happy. The protagonist replies that he believes that if he's happy, the people around him will also be. His father stands still for a moment and asks about the end of this emotion. He responds that the end is just a cheap illusion that is part of the process. The leader watches him and says he thinks it's good that he thinks this way, and if he intends to follow this path, he recommends he forget happiness. The young master says he will follow this path and still find happiness. He looks serious, thinking he will achieve this no matter the cost. Elsewhere, among many flowers, someone gently runs their hands, and it's Yon walking among them, saying that the flowers are really beautiful and that as they age, they become even more beautiful. But for the young man, this is still far away. The swordsman thinks that when he aged, this didn't matter to him, and says he sincerely thanks her help, and as a token of gratitude, he brought some drink. The Supreme thanks him for the gift but doesn't drink, saying it's been a long time since she stopped. The protagonist thinks that he already knew she didn't drink, but brought the drink on purpose so it wouldn't seem like he knew her too well. And though it may seem small, these little things build relationships, and he should do everything possible. He says he learned that when receiving help, he must reciprocate and asks if there's something she desires. So replies that it would be better to cut ties with the bloody sky. The young master thinks that this is exactly what he had predicted and asks why. Yeon remains silent for a moment before explaining that he's the opposite of the ideals she pursues, and while the young man wants to turn the sect into a place of order and discipline, Doma hates being restricted by rules. The swordsman watches her intently and says he can't follow her advice. The Supreme turns around, asking if he can't. The protagonist replies no, and says that the bloody sky gave him a very valuable gift, and while he wouldn't have mentioned it, he intends to tell exactly what he received because he doesn't just want the old man by his side, but also wants her to be his ally. So asks about the gift. The young master responds that it's something personal he prefers not to say. She says she thought their relationship was at the level of sharing this kind of thing. The swordsman looks at her and says that since the veteran helped him a lot this time, he'll tell. He gave him the heavenly divine elixir. Yeon is surprised and asks if he really gave it to him. The protagonist says yes, and that he considered it more valuable than the elixir itself. The Supreme remains silent, and the young master says that he thanks her very much for the help, and if she ever needs anything in the future, she can call him. He turns to leave, but she calls him and asks what he thinks of Doma. The swordsman looks at her and replies that he finds him eccentric, violent, and stubborn. At first he didn't like him, but as he got to know him, he started to find him better than he imagined. So asks if it's not just because of the heavenly divine elixir. The protagonist answers that this also helped. Yeon says that even so, he's not trustworthy, and if he wants to keep counting on her help, he needs to cut ties with him. The young master says for her to prove she can be more useful than him, because he got the elixir from him, and if she wants him to sever ties with someone like that, she needs a solid reason. The Supreme asks if the reason isn't for the good of the sect. The swordsman responds that dreams, ideas, loyalty, and people who try to win over subordinates and disciples with only pretty words. He despises these kinds of people, so releases a great mana into the flowers. The protagonist says that he doesn't know how he's seen, but he's preparing something grand, and he'll meet many people in the future, and he won't always be able to judge clearly what is right or wrong. That's why he wants her to show him something that can be judged, something more valuable than the heavenly divine elixir that the bloody sky gave him, and something that can put something even more precious in his hands. Jan just stares at him. The young master wonders if Doma is untrustworthy and thinks that this is nonsense because it's the only choice. And if it weren't, he wouldn't be hesitating like this. The Supreme stops emitting mana and asks what he truly wants. The swordsman, with his hand open, closes it and answers that right now, he doesn't want anything. So stares at him, and the protagonist thinks that to her, his words sounded like he already had the bloody sky by his side, so he's already satisfied. Anne says they will see each other soon, and that he won't forget the help she gave this time. He turns his back again and smiles, thinking that since he said he doesn't want anything, it will make her even more anxious. Elsewhere, the young master is with the old man, asking about what the fox said. The swordsman answers that she said he should sever the tie because they have very different ideas. The bloody sky asks what he intends to do. The protagonist replies that he will ally with whoever offers the best conditions, and asks if he can weigh his options, because he wouldn't do otherwise, and wouldn't the old man do the same? Domo stares at him without saying a word. The protagonist smiles and says that for now, he is still in the lead, and doesn't believe the veteran can offer anything better than the elixir. The old man says that if it's to harm him, she would do anything. The young master asks if their relationship has gotten that bad. The bloody sky stays silent for a moment. The swordsman thinks he knows the answer, and Domo asks if when he hates someone, he needs a reason. The protagonist asks what he thinks about a drink and says that if he keeps coming back like this, he'll just keep brooding and feeling irritated. The old man asks what he thinks it is. The young master asks if maybe it's cold and calculating, and says he doesn't think that's one of his virtues, and that when he's sad, he needs to allow himself to feel and not repress, and when something bothers him, he should speak up and vent. And today, the round is on him. The bloody sky strikes the ground with his sword and leaps to leave, saying he'll wait for him at Magashon. The swordsman watches and smiles. In the Pungryu tavern, people are eating. Looking at it, a voice says that she thought they were going to a courtesan's house. Domo replies that he doesn't like places with women. The protagonist says this is unexpected, as his eliminated brother liked going to these places. The old man says he'd lost the will to drink and to stop talking about him. The young master agrees and thinks he mentioned it on purpose so that the wounds in his heart wouldn't wither inside him. The waiter says it's an honor to have them there. The swordsman says they came here because the food and drinks are good, and the waiter thanks them and leaves. The bloody sky says he's too kind. The protagonist asks if there's something wrong with being kind. Domo says that if you let yourself be carried away by emotions, sooner or later you'll end up making mistakes just like the owner of this place, and asks if he's kind, doesn't he think the owner will make better food? Or does he think that threatening to eliminate him if the food is bad will make him try harder? And says that in this sense his brother has more of an advantage. The young master stares at him and says that cold people live more easily, but he doesn't intend to climb aboard this train of coldness. He smiles and says that he believes the food that's arriving now, made with joy and whistling, will taste better than if it were prepared with fear. The bloody sky looks at him and says that one day this man will take advantage of kindness and demand something even greater, and if refused, will criticize and insult him, and that's how people are. The swordsman says that maybe one day, because of kindness, he will repay him with something even greater, and who knows, he might even save his life, because that's also what it means to be human. Domo says he'll see what happens. The protagonist says he finds him even more emotional than himself. They both eat. The old man asks how he managed to block his blade with those eyes, as he judged him very wrong for someone with such vision. The young master thinks that he judged him right, and that since they started interacting, he's been emotionally drained much more than usual. Even now, and right now, they're having a conversation he's never had before, and it's also draining his emotions. The swordsman places his cup on the table and says he might allow something, and that he needs to start controlling the disciples better. Otherwise, he will keep clashing with the Nirvana Pavilion. The bloody sky says he's getting more arrogant. He responds that the arrogant one is him. Domo yells indignantly, and the protagonist asks if he's not underestimating his father's sect. And why wouldn't he, since he's the sword demon? And asks if he thinks the disciples don't matter. The old man, irritated, breaks the table, releasing intense mana. The young master stares at him, and pieces of plates and tables fall to the ground. The owner of the place is frightened, and people around are also scared. The bloody sky says he feels like eliminating him to the end. and asks the owner what he's looking at and why the drinks and food aren't there yet. The swordsman says that's not how you do things. He places coins on the table, apologizes, and asks if the money covers the damage and compensates for the loss of the night. The owner of the place replies that it's not necessary. The protagonist hands him the coins and says it's fine with him, and that he can take the money and serve another table, and he wants it full of food. Domo asks if he wants him to do this kind of thing. The young master replies that if he doesn't want to pay, then he shouldn't break anything. The old man asks if he's trying to teach good manners to a supreme demon. He answers that the sect he's building doesn't destroy taverns just because someone is in a bad mood. The bloody sky yells, but the swordsman interrupts him, slamming his hand on the table and telling him to stop fighting and sit down. Domo, irritated, sits down and says he's crazy, and that if he betrays him, he'll eliminate him. The owner of the place arrives with the dishes, terrified, and runs away, and the protagonist asks if he's serious. The old man responds that he does. The young master says to serve him with true loyalty, and that this kind of threat only has value when one is truly loyal. And if one is loyal to oneself but betrays and discards him, then that is when he can thrust the sword into his master's heart. The bloody sky doesn't respond. The swordsman tells him to accept his drink. Domo watches the boy pour the drink. The two stare at each other, and the protagonist hands the drink to him. The old man watches and takes it. The young master thinks he knows, and that the old man might not have toasted, but in his mind, the cup has already been raised. Elsewhere, the Supreme is among the flowers, and someone approaches, saying that the boy is drinking with her enemy and that he's an arrogant man. So tells them to be careful with what they say, as speaking behind someone's back is one of the lowest things. The subordinate says he will remember that. Yan says this isn't the boy she knew. The subordinate says that even so, this is nothing but a storm in a teacup. The Supreme asks if the teacup is large enough to contain the entire Murim. She says that the old man giving him the elixir was like offering everything he had, and he must have seen potential in the boy as a successor. The subordinate asks if she also sees potential in him, so stays silent and thinks that yes, he showed something unexpected, but not enough to deserve an elixir. This irritates her, and she wonders if the sword demon saw something she couldn't. She questions if the old man saw something she missed. The subordinate says she should rest for today, as he has prepared a new companion for her tonight. Yan looks back and walks past him. The subordinate watches her silently. Elsewhere, the protagonist enters and observes. Thinking that this is the first time he's entering his father's private training room, he notices something and wonders if it's eternal steel and about the marks on it. The young master touches it and asks if this isn't abuse against eternal steel. His father arrives, telling him to stop with the nonsense and execute the 4 steps of the wind god. The swordsman replies that he understands and begins performing, while the sect leader watches. As the protagonist executes the move, he thinks that the 4 steps of the wind god have 4 main movements, with over 900 variations in total. And the way he interprets and executes those variations changes with each movement, directly affecting the power of the technique. The young master continues performing until he looks back, confused, wondering why his father is like this, and whether he made a mistake. He thinks that maybe it's because he recognized him, and from there, they started discussing martial techniques with his father. They shared their opinions, and he listened silently, even accepting them. His father opens his eyes and says, "It was said that applying more force with the right foot seems to be the correct interpretation." The swordsman thinks he never imagined his father could be so flexible and rational about martial arts. The sect leader says to close his eyes and share the understanding he's reached. The protagonist listens, closes his eyes, and imagines a place where he can see the reflection of his movements. He thinks that thanks to the discussions with his father, his mastery of the 4 steps of the wind god has deepened even further. He thanks for the teachings, thinking that this debt will be paid by eliminating Hua Mugi, and says he'll repay it with his allowance later. His father tells him to stop talking nonsense and calls him to eat. The young master is surprised, and the sect leader asks what's wrong. The swordsman replies that this is the first time he's been called to eat together. His father stares at him, looks to the side, and turns, saying that he's surprised by every little detail. They sit around a banquet. The protagonist eats at the table with him. The leader watches his son eating. The young master thinks it must seem strange that he's not joking around like usual, and his father has no idea that, before going back in time, he never missed this moment before. But now that he's here, he finally realizes that, deep down, he missed it. The sect leader asks if he liked the food. The swordsman asks if he wants to change cooks. His father replies that it's not necessary. He places an object on the table and asks why he came looking for him. The protagonist responds that he would like to be added as a new member of the sect. The leader asks if he wants to marry. The young master replies no, and that he just wants to teach the ascending sword technique to the personal guard, An. and thinks that he intends to pass on the ascending sword to An, the supreme technique he himself perfected. And with this technique, she will be able to protect her position as the leader of the Ghost Division. The problem is that the ascending sword art can only be passed down to direct descendants of the celestial demon. The sect leader says that he criticizes his own brother behind his back and asks if he now wants to become part of An. The swordsman replies that yes, and that she is more valuable to him than to a blood relative. Furthermore, she is someone who will accomplish great feats in the future. His father asks if he's sure he wants to share the ascending sword, the exclusive technique. The protagonist responds that his exclusive technique will be the demonic technique of 9 transformations, and thinks that the demonic technique of 9 transformations cannot be inherited just by being a descendant of the celestial demon. It is passed only to the true successor. The leader says that he is very confident and that he allows it. The young master is surprised and wonders if he will allow it so easily. The sect master says to promise one thing. The swordsman replies that he can say, and his father says that the next time he decides to eliminate a supreme demon, he should give prior notice no matter which supreme he chooses. The protagonist says that he promises. Elsewhere, a voice approaches asking if it was called. It's Lee. The young master turns, watching her, and says that from now on, he will teach a new technique. The subordinate asks if he's serious. He replies that yes, and that he will transmit the ascending sword art. Lee looks surprised and says that the ascending sword art is an exclusive technique for the descendants of the celestial demon. The swordsman asks if she's finished speaking. The subordinate says that she will be direct and that this can't happen because the celestial demon could find out, and that would be very bad. The protagonist responds that he has received permission from his father. Lee asks if he's serious. He answers that yes. The subordinate asks why he wants to teach it to her. The young master replies that to be the leader of the Ghost Division, she needs to master a technique of this level. Furthermore, it's as if she's part of his family so she can learn it. Lee is paralyzed, not knowing what to say. The swordsman smiles. The subordinate asks how she could dare learn his technique, and how she could. She approaches, trembling, and says that this has never happened before, and that no one has ever valued her like this. The protagonist watches her, placing his hand on her shoulders, and says that she has always been a precious person. Lee begins to cry heavily. The young master keeps watching her, his hands on her shoulders. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.